He ordered 2 meals every Friday night for 3 years, one for himself. One, never touched, for the woman buried in the east side of the cemetery. Nobody asked why. Nobody dared sit in that chair. Until the night a stranger walked in from the rain, arms wrapped tight around a small boy, eyes carrying the specific kind of fear that doesn't come from ghosts or nightmares. It comes from a man, a living one. She looked at that empty plate across from Ethan Walker, and something shifted in the air between them. If you've ever lost someone and didn't know how to let go, stay with me until the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and something close to home. It wasn't much. A strip of fluorescent light humming above a row of vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner that hadn't worked since 2019, and a laminated menu with prices that hadn't changed since the place opened. Marlowe's Diner sat on the edge of Crestfield, the kind of neighborhood that used to mean something before the factories closed and the good families moved north. Now it meant cracked sidewalks, corner stores with iron grates, and people who worked too hard for too little and still showed up every morning like it mattered. Ethan Walker showed up every Friday at 7:14 p.m. Not 7, not 7:30. 7:14 because that was the time Rachel used to get off her shift at the hospital on Fridays, and she'd walk the 6 blocks to meet him still smelling like antiseptic and hand sanitizer, her scrubs wrinkled, her ponytail half fallen, laughing at something that happened on her floor before she even sat down. He never meant to keep the exact time. It just happened. His hands would find the keys, his truck would find the road, and somehow he was always pulling into the parking lot at 7:12, giving himself exactly 2 minutes to sit with the silence before pushing through the door. 3 years. He'd done it for 3 years. The usual? Deb asked before he was fully through the door. Deb Colson was 63, wore her silver hair in a bun that was always slightly off-center, and had the kind of face that had seen enough of life to stop being surprised by any of it. She'd been working at Marlowe's for 22 years. She'd been watching Ethan Walker order 2 meals every Friday for the last 3. Yeah, he said, sliding into the booth by the window. The same one. Always the same one. Corner, facing the door, enough distance from the kitchen noise to hear yourself think. He set his jacket on the seat across from him. Not on the hook. On the seat. The way he used to when Rachel would pile her coat and her bag there before she sat down and complained about how cold it was even in July. The jacket wasn't hers. He knew that. He wasn't that far gone. It was just something his hands did without asking his brain first. Deb brought the coffee without being asked and set it down in front of him. She put a second cup on the other side of the table, too. She'd learned not to comment on it after the first month. Outside the window, Crestfield was doing what it always did on a Friday night. The laundromat across the street glowing orange through the rain-streaked glass, a couple arguing near the bus stop, a kid on a bicycle weaving between puddles. Ordinary, relentless, the world keeping its engine running whether anyone wanted it to or not. Ethan wrapped both hands around his mug. He was 32 years old, but there were nights, and this was one of them, when he felt like something left on a shelf too long. Not broken, just faded. His hands were rough from years of engine grease that never completely washed out. His knuckles were mapped with small scars from tools slipping at the wrong moment, and there was a permanent half circle of dark under his fingernails that no amount of scrubbing fully removed. He was broad-shouldered in the way that comes from actual work rather than a gym, and his face carried the particular tired that doesn't go away after one good night's sleep. He'd been a mechanic since he was 19. Started under his uncle's supervision in a garage 2 towns over, learned to read engines the way other people read faces. By sound, by vibration, by the small, wrong things that most people missed. He was good at it. Not gifted with his hands good in some romantic sense. Just genuinely, practically good. The kind of mechanic people drove 40 minutes out of their way to find because he didn't lie about what was wrong, and he didn't charge for what wasn't. He opened his own shop 6 years ago. Walker's Auto. A converted warehouse space on Delmar Street, just big enough for 2 lifts, a parts storage room, a bathroom with questionable plumbing, and a small office where he kept the books badly and the coffee strong. He employed one other person, Marcus, 24, who had come in looking for an oil change and ended up asking if he could learn. Ethan had said yes because the kid reminded him of himself, which he realized later was both a compliment and a warning. The shop kept them both alive. Barely, some months, but consistently. His son, Danny, was 8 years old and currently staying at Ethan's mother's house for the weekend, which was the only reason Ethan's booth felt even emptier than usual. Danny was the kind of kid who filled a room. Not loud exactly, but present in a way that left a hole when he was gone. He had his mother's eyes, which Ethan had stopped being able to look at directly without his chest doing something involuntary, and his father's stubborn silence when something was wrong. He was handling the loss of his mother the way 8-year-olds handle things they can't process, in pieces, unevenly, and in ways that only made sense 6 months after the fact. He'd cried at a commercial last November. He'd asked Ethan once, very matter-of-factly, whether Mom could still see them from wherever she was, and then immediately said, "Never mind," and walked to his room before Ethan could figure out what to say. Ethan still didn't know what he would have said. Deb came back with 2 plates, pot roast with mashed potatoes and a side of green beans, which is what Rachel always ordered, and the grilled chicken sandwich with the extra pickles, which is what Ethan always ordered. The same order, reproduced from a 3-year-old memory, every Friday without deviation. "How's the shop?" Deb asked, because she always asked something. "Busy," Ethan said. "Danny?" "Good. He's at Mom's." Deb nodded in a way that meant she understood more than she was going to say, and moved back down the counter. Ethan ate his sandwich slowly. He wasn't a man who talked a lot, never had been. Rachel used to say that getting Ethan Walker to open up was like trying to coax a feral cat out from under a porch. You had to be patient, you had to move slowly, and you absolutely could not rush it or you'd lose whatever ground you'd gained. She'd said it without cruelty. She'd found it endearing in a way that sometimes annoyed him because he didn't understand what was endearing about it. He understood it better now that she was gone, because the silence he'd always lived in had a different quality to it now. Before, it was comfortable. The silence of a man who doesn't need to fill space with sound. Now it was the silence of a room where someone used to be. He was halfway through his sandwich when the storm changed character outside. It had been raining all evening, the steady, unremarkable kind of October rain that Crestfield got every year right before the temperature dropped for real. But around 8:30, it shifted. The wind picked up, and the rain started coming sideways, loud enough against the diner windows that the jukebox that didn't work would have been drowned out even if it had. That's when the door opened. The bell above it barely registered over the weather. She came in with the rain, basically. The door swung open and the wind took it further than she intended, banging it against the wall, and she had to fight it closed with her shoulder while also holding on to the hand of a small boy who was pressed against her side like he was trying to fit inside her jacket. She was soaked. Completely, entirely, not been out in this accidentally, but been walking in, it soaked. Her dark hair was plastered to her face and neck. Her coat was one of those expensive ones that lost all evidence of its expense the moment it got wet, and there was a bag over her shoulder that was clearly heavier than she was comfortable carrying. She looked like someone who had been moving fast and then ran out of options. The boy was maybe 6 or 7. He had his face turned into her arm, not looking at the diner at all, just existing in the small, warm space she was creating around him. He was wearing a jacket that was too thin for this weather. So was she. The diner had 4 other customers. An older man nursing pie at the counter, a young couple in the booth nearest the door, and a guy in a trucker hat reading something on his phone. All of them looked up, the way you look at someone who's come in from a storm, with that split-second assessment of whether they're fine or not fine. She was not fine. Deb was already moving toward her, which is what Deb did. She had a maternal instinct that deployed regardless of whether she had permission. "Honey, come on in, get out of the doorway," Deb said, guiding her toward the counter. "You need to sit down? You need something hot? What do you need?" The woman looked at Deb, and something in her face flickered. Not gratitude exactly. It was too guarded for gratitude. More like she was running a quick calculation, deciding whether this was safe, whether this person was what she appeared to be. Is there somewhere we can sit?" Her voice was steady, controlled, not the voice of someone who'd been out in the cold long enough to be shaking, which is what she was. "Just for a little while. I'm sorry. I know we're a mess." You're not a mess, you're wet, Deb said. There's a difference. Booth or counter? Booth, the woman said. Then quieter, away from the windows, if possible. That landed differently than the rest of it. You don't specify away from the windows unless you have a reason to. Deb's face didn't change, but her eyes did. Just a slight shift, a recalibration of what she was dealing with. She guided them to the booth nearest the back, which was also the one closest to the kitchen, which meant it was the warmest. Ethan watched this happen from across the diner. He wasn't staring. He wasn't the kind of man who stared. But his booth had a clear line of sight to most of the room, and she was the kind of thing that was hard not to notice. Not because of anything particularly striking about her appearance, though she was, under the wet coat and the exhaustion, a composed and quietly beautiful woman. What he noticed was the way she moved. Careful. Deliberate. The way she positioned herself in the booth, so the boy was on the inside against the wall, and she was on the outside, facing the room. Protective. Practiced. The body language of someone who'd done this before. The constant low-level surveillance of exits and entrances, the checking of faces for recognition. He'd seen it once before, years ago, on a woman who'd come into the shop with a cracked windshield and 2 broken fingers she said she'd gotten closing a car door wrong. He hadn't pushed on it then. He hadn't known what to do. He wasn't sure he knew what to do now either. He turned back to his plate. Deb brought them water and then tea. She'd made the executive decision on the tea, and no one was going to challenge her on it. And the boy finally unwrapped himself from his mother's side enough to sit up and look around the diner with the wide, exhausted eyes of a child who'd been running on adrenaline and was now crashing. Ethan heard Deb say, "Can I bring you something to eat, sweetie?" directed at the boy, and heard the woman say quickly, too quickly, "We're fine, we don't need—" and then stop. Deb waited. A long pause. "I don't—" the woman started. Another pause. "I don't actually have—" She stopped again, and that was the sentence she couldn't finish, not without the careful composure she'd been holding cracking in some visible and specific way. Because what the sentence was, finished, was, "I don't actually have any money, or not enough, or not accessible." Something in that category that a woman in an expensive coat in a diner on the edge of a city wasn't supposed to say, and clearly had not planned on having to say. Ethan watched Deb process this without any visible reaction. She'd heard it before. Not in those exact words. People rarely said it in those exact words. But she knew the shape of the sentence, the way it collapsed in the middle. "Don't worry about that tonight," Deb said, simply, which was Deb's way of saying it was handled and they could both pretend this hadn't been difficult. Ethan went back to his plate again. He ate the rest of his sandwich. He drank his coffee. He did not look at the untouched plate across from him the way he sometimes did. A kind of pointless inventory of grief, measuring what was there against what was no longer there. He heard the boy's voice for the first time, asking something quietly, too low to make out, and the woman's voice answering, also too low. And he heard just once the boy say, "Are we going to be okay, Mom?" The kind of question a child asks when they already know something is wrong and they're not asking for information. They're asking for a specific kind of lie. The kind of lie that means, "Hold me up for a little longer, just a little more." Ethan didn't hear what she said back. He looked at the plate across from him. The untouched pot roast. The mashed potatoes getting cold. The green beans arranged the way Deb always arranged them because she'd learned it from Rachel, which was a kindness that still caught him off guard sometimes. He sat with it for a moment. Then he picked up the plate and the cup of untouched coffee, stood up from the booth, and carried them across the diner. The woman looked up the moment he was close enough to register, and her body shifted. A microscopic movement, but real. The kind of shift that said, "Who are you? What do you want? Where are my exits?" She had one hand already reaching for the boy instinctively. Ethan stopped a few feet back. He held up the plate slightly. Not in a gesture of peace exactly. More in a gesture of, "I'm not going to make this weird, I just have a plate. I ordered too much," he said. It was the simplest lie in the world. She knew it was a lie. He knew she knew, but it was a lie that gave her somewhere to put it, a way to accept without having to name what she was accepting. She looked at him for a second, not gratefully, cautiously. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I'm aware," he said. The food's getting cold. Another pause. The boy had turned to look at him. He had big, serious eyes and a small bruise on the left side of his jaw, the kind that was a few days old and fading green at the edges. Ethan clocked it and then deliberately moved his eyes away because he knew better than to react. The woman followed his gaze to the boy's face and then back to him. And in that moment, there was a kind of silent exchange. Him communicating that he'd seen it, her communicating that she was aware, and neither of them saying anything about it out loud. "Okay," she said. Not "thank you," just "okay," which he found obscurely easier. He set the plate and coffee down. "Booth across if you need the space," he said, meaning his own booth, meaning they could have it if they wanted, which he immediately felt was too much, too forward, and "We're fine here," she said, "but thank you." He went back to his side of the diner. He didn't order dessert, which he sometimes did. He paid his check and left the usual tip plus extra, which was what he did every Friday, and he got his jacket from the seat across from his because the jacket was his and had always been his, and he said goodnight to Deb, who squeezed his arm in a way that was her version of everything unspoken. At the door, he stopped. He didn't turn around. He just stood at the door for a second, hand on the frame. The rain was still coming down hard. He could hear it against the glass. He could also hear, behind him, the sound of the boy eating. A small, steady sound, a hungry child not trying to hide it anymore, and the woman saying something too quiet to catch, and the small boy answering in a voice that was less afraid than it had been 10 minutes ago. Ethan pushed through the door. The cold hit him right away. He walked to his truck with his collar up against the rain, unlocked it, got in. He sat there for a minute in the dark. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know what she was running from. He didn't know the story behind the bruise on the boy's jaw, or the way her eyes moved around every room like she was memorizing escape routes, or why she'd ended up at a diner in Crestfield on a Friday night in October with no money and wet shoes and a child who asked if they were going to be okay. He didn't know any of it. He also didn't go home. He sat in the truck. The heater ran. The rain drummed on the roof. From where he was parked, he could see the diner window, the warm orange light of it, the shapes of people inside. He told himself he was just waiting for the rain to ease up. He wasn't. Not really. But that's what he told himself. Inside, Deb refilled the woman's tea. "I'm Carol," the woman said, which was not her name, though Deb didn't know that. She'd chosen it quickly. The first name that came safe and ordinary and not hers. "I'm Deb," said Deb, "and this is Marlowe's, which is named after a man who has been dead for 40 years and whose family has never once come in to eat here, which I find rude personally." The boy made a sound that was almost a laugh. Deb looked at him. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Liam," he said. It was his real name, which the woman, who was not Carol, would note later as a thing she'd have to be more careful about. But he'd said it before she could say anything, and she found she didn't have the heart to correct him. "Liam," Deb repeated. "Are you liking the pot roast?" "It's really good," he said, with the complete sincerity of a hungry child who had been eating granola bars for 2 days and was currently experiencing pot roast as a revelation. The woman who called herself Carol looked at her son eating and felt something in her chest that wasn't exactly relief and wasn't exactly grief, but lived somewhere in the narrow corridor between them. She looked across the diner to the booth where the man had been sitting. The empty booth now. The coffee cup still there. The check folded on the edge. She didn't know his name. She didn't know why he'd done what he'd done. In her experience, in the very specific, narrow, painful experience that had brought her to this diner on this particular night, men who walked toward you in your moment of weakness wanted something for it. Always. Maybe this one did too. She didn't know yet. She just knew that her son was eating and warm, and for the first time in 3 days had stopped looking at her with those eyes that were too old for his age and too frightened for any child. That was enough for right now. Outside, Ethan Walker sat in his truck for 45 more minutes. The rain eased around 9:30. He watched the diner until the lights stayed steady and the shapes inside didn't change into anything alarming, and then he started the engine and drove home to his house on Carver Street, which smelled like motor oil and old wood and nobody. He put his keys on the hook by the door. He stood in the kitchen for a minute. He thought about the small voice in the diner. Are we going to be okay, Mom? He thought about his own son, asleep at his mother's house, and the question Danny had asked him 8 months after Rachel died. Not, are we going to be okay, but something worse, somehow. Danny had asked, was it my fault, Dad, that she got sick? Ethan had sat down on the floor right there in the hallway. He'd pulled Danny down with him and held him for a long time. He didn't say anything for a while because everything that came to mind felt insufficient. Finally, he said, no, it wasn't anybody's fault. That's the worst part about it. Danny had nodded into his shoulder like that made sense, which it didn't, but somehow it was the right answer anyway. He thought about that now. He washed his face, changed his shirt, and went to bed. He lay in the dark for a long time, looking at the ceiling. Outside, the rain had stopped. In a booth at Marlowe's diner, a woman who was not Carol finally let Liam fall asleep against her shoulder, and then sat very still and stared at the table and tried to figure out what she was going to do tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. She had a phone with 17% battery and 2 names in it she was afraid to call. She had $240 in a folded envelope in the inside pocket of her coat. She had a son who needed a bed and a door that locked. And she had, for reasons she couldn't fully articulate, the image of a stranger who'd crossed a diner with a plate of food and offered it without asking for anything in return. She'd known a lot of wealthy men in her life. Men who wrote checks and expected credit for it. Men who helped because it confirmed something about themselves. Men who gave and kept the receipt. She didn't know what to do with someone who just put the plate down and walked away. She sat with that for a while. Okay, honey, Deb said gently, appearing with her coat. It was closing time. She hadn't said anything, had just let them stay until the last customer left and the close sign went up. I don't make it a habit of asking people their business, but I'm going to ask if you have somewhere to be tonight. The woman looked up at her. The honest answer was no. We're looking into options, she said, which was a thing people said when the real answer was no, but they weren't ready to say it. Deb looked at her for a long moment. Then she took out her phone, typed something, and slid it across the table. An address, Delmar Street. Walker's Auto, she said. There's a back room in the workshop. I know because I've brought that man soup there on exactly 6 occasions when he was working too late and forgetting to eat. She paused. He's got a key behind the 3rd fire extinguisher on the left, which I know because I've watched him reach for it, and he's a man who doesn't change things once he's put them somewhere. He'd never tell you this himself because he doesn't know how to offer things out loud. The woman stared at her. I can't just, she started. I know, Deb said, but it's raining again and your son is asleep and you've been sitting here running out of options for the last 2 hours. She pulled her coat back. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you what I know. She went back to the counter and started stacking the salt and pepper shakers into their overnight tray. The woman looked down at the address on Deb's phone. She looked at Liam, asleep against her arm. She thought about a man who crossed a diner with a plate of food. Then she wrote down the address on a napkin, tucked it into her coat pocket, and sat there for a while longer, turning it over. The key was exactly where Deb said it would be. It was 10:47 p.m. when she found it, behind the 3rd fire extinguisher on a small hook that you'd only notice if you were looking for it. The workshop door opened with a sound like a long exhale, and she stepped inside with Liam half awake against her shoulder and the door swinging shut behind them. The garage smelled like oil and cold metal and something faintly chemical that she couldn't identify. 2 car lifts stood empty in the dark, their arms raised like they were mid-gesture. A pegboard of tools lined one wall, every tool outlined in marker so you could see what was missing. A beat-up radio on the shelf above the workbench. A calendar on the wall from 3 years ago with no X's on the dates. She didn't turn on the main lights. She used her phone. The back room was past the parts storage, a space that had clearly started as a storage overflow and evolved, gradually, into something more habitable. A cot, a space heater, a shelf with some water bottles and what appeared to be an emergency kit, a lock on the inside of the door that worked. She put Liam down on the cot. He didn't fully wake up. He made a sound and curled onto his side and pulled his knees up, and she took off his sneakers and covered him with the one blanket that was folded at the foot of the cot, and she stood there in the near dark and watched him breathe. His jaw was healing. The bruise was lighter than it had been 4 days ago. It would be gone in another week, maybe less. She sat down on the floor with her back against the cot and her coat still on and her bag against her side. Her name was Victoria Langford. She was 30 years old. She had a net worth that most people couldn't fully picture. She had a company that employed 412 people, a penthouse in the city that she had not been able to return to in 11 days, and a legal team that was technically on retainer but practically useless because the man she was running from had better lawyers, deeper connections, and no moral ceiling to operate under. His name was Victor Hayes. He had been her fiancé for 8 months before she understood what she was engaged to. He had been her ex for 14 months since she'd found out, since the night Liam had come to her in the kitchen with his face the way it was, and said something that a 6-year-old should never have to say, and she had understood, with the cold clarity that comes in only the worst moments, that the man she'd brought into their lives was something she hadn't been able to see clearly because she hadn't been looking at the right things. She'd left that same night, taken Liam, taken her go-bag she'd quietly assembled over the previous 3 months, and walked out while Victor was on a call in his office. He'd found her twice. Once at her assistant's apartment, once at a hotel 2 states over that she'd paid for in cash, which still didn't make sense. How he'd found that one still didn't make sense, which was why she was here. Crestfield, a mechanic's workshop on Delmar Street, obtained through a chain of kindness she hadn't asked for. She closed her eyes. She thought about what tomorrow would require. She needed to contact her lawyer, not the firm Victor knew about, the other one, the one she'd retained quietly 6 months ago when she started planning what escape might look like. She needed a phone charger. She needed to figure out whether this workshop belonged to someone who was going to come back in the morning and find her here and call the police. She thought about the man from the diner. She thought about the 2 coffee cups at his table. The second one, untouched. The way he'd sat alone in that booth with the specific stillness of someone who has arranged their pain into something manageable and returns to it every week to make sure it's still contained. She recognized it, abstractly. The way grief became ritual, the way you kept showing up to the places where someone used to be. Not because it helped, but because stopping felt like a different kind of loss. She didn't know anything about him, but she knew that. She sat on the floor of his workshop with her son asleep behind her, and the sound of the city outside reduced to nothing, and she let herself breathe for the first time in 3 days. Just breathe. Not plan, not calculate, not assess. Just in and out. Liam made a sound in his sleep. Not a bad one, just a shifting, a settling, and she put her hand back to rest on his ankle through the blanket. "I've got you," she said, very quietly. The same thing she'd been saying since the night they left. The same thing she planned to keep saying until it was completely, permanently, irreversibly true. She didn't know yet that the man who owned this workshop would come in at 7:45 the next morning and find them there. She didn't know what would happen when he did. She sat in the dark with her hand on her son's ankle, and the city breathed outside, and the heater ticked, and for a little while, just a little while, she stopped running. Ethan got to the shop at 7:45 the next morning, same as always. He had a 1998 Silverado waiting on the left lift, a transmission job that was going to eat most of the day, and he'd stopped for coffee at the gas station on the corner because the machine in the break room had been making a sound he didn't trust. He had his key out before he reached the door, which is why he noticed immediately that the door wasn't fully latched. The lock hadn't engaged. The gap was maybe a 1/4 inch, barely visible. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't the person who'd locked it the night before. He stood there for a second. He was not a man who panicked. He was also not a man who ignored things. He pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside. The shop looked the same, tools on the pegboard, cars where he'd left them. The radio on the shelf still tuned to the classic rock station Marcus kept changing it to, and Ethan kept changing back. Nothing moved, nothing missing. He stood in the middle of the floor and listened. From behind the parts storage, he heard it. Small sounds. Movement. The particular rustling of someone trying to be very quiet. He walked toward the back room. He didn't knock, which he'd regret a second later, because when he opened the door, the woman from the diner was already on her feet with something in her hand. He registered it as a wrench, which she must have picked up from somewhere in the shop, which told him everything about what her 3 days before last night had looked like. She lowered it when she saw him, but only slightly. "I can explain," she said. "Deb," he said. She blinked. "She told you?" "She told someone she knew about the key," he said. "She didn't tell me who, but she texted me at 11 last night and said I should probably stop at the shop before starting on anything else this morning." A pause. On the cot behind the woman, the boy, Liam, was sitting up, rubbing his face, looking between them with the expression of a child who has learned to read adult tension as an early warning system. "I should have asked," the woman said. "I know. I'm sorry. We were going to be out before you—" "You weren't going to be out at 7:45, he said. Not accusatory, just factual. "No," she admitted. "Not at 7:45. He looked at the cot. The boy. The bag on the floor. The coat folded over the end of the cot with the care of someone who'd learned to treat their one good coat like an object of survival. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." "Is he hurt?" Her jaw tightened. "He's fine." "That's not what I asked." She met his eyes and held them. She had the kind of eyes that worked hard, not emotionally, not in the soft way the word is usually meant, but literally working, calculating, assessing. He got the sense she was reading him the way he read engines, looking for the thing that was wrong, the thing that didn't add up. "He's healing," she said finally. Ethan nodded. He looked at the boy. "You hungry?" The boy looked at his mother. She gave him something with her eyes, permission or close enough. And he looked back at Ethan and said, "Yeah. There's a bodega 2 blocks up. I usually get breakfast there on Saturdays." He looked at the woman. "I'm Ethan Walker." Another pause. She was deciding something. He could see it. "Carol," she said. It came out a fraction too smoothly, which meant it wasn't her name. He didn't say that. "Okay, Carol," he said. "Give me 5 minutes." He went back out into the shop. He called Marcus and told him to push the Silverado job to Monday, which Marcus accepted with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been hoping for a reason to sleep in. Then he stood by the workbench for a moment and drank his gas station coffee and looked at nothing in particular. He didn't know what he was doing. He was reasonably certain it was going to be complicated. He also didn't see a clear alternative that he could live with. He went back to the door. "Ready?" The bodega on the corner of Del Mar and 6th was run by a man named Oswaldo, who had known Ethan for 4 years and communicated primarily in single syllables and head movements, but made the best egg sandwich in a 6-block radius and never charged full price. He looked at Ethan, then at the woman and child with him, and then made 3 sandwiches without being asked and charged for 2. They ate in the shop. Liam sat on an upturned crate next to the Silverado and ate his sandwich with both hands and looked at the car lift with open fascination. "What does that do?" he asked, pointing. "Lifts cars," Ethan said. "Like, all the way up?" "High enough to get underneath." "Have you ever dropped one?" "No." "Has anyone ever dropped one?" "Not me," Ethan said, which satisfied Liam enough to take another bite. The woman, not Carol, whoever she actually was eating standing up near the door, which was a habit he recognized as someone who needed to feel like they could leave at any moment. She ate quickly, like she'd trained herself out of tasting food, like eating had been reduced to its function. "You don't have to stand," he said. "I know," she said. She didn't sit down. He let it go. "I'm not going to ask you a lot of questions," he said, "but I need to know one thing. Is whatever you're running from going to show up here?" She looked at him. "I don't know," she said. "That's the honest answer. I've been careful." "How did you find this place?" "Deb." "Deb doesn't know the half of what Deb knows," he said, which was so precisely true that it caught her slightly off guard, and something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile, but the thing that happens just before one almost appears. "I'm not going to put you in danger," she said. I'm not trying to bring anything here." Nobody tries to bring anything anywhere, he said. It just follows. She didn't argue with that. I understand if you want us to go. I do. We'll go right now if you say so. He looked at Liam, who had finished his sandwich and was now examining a torque wrench with the focused interest of a child who had just discovered something he didn't know existed. That's a torque wrench, Ethan said to the boy. Careful with the... It's heavy, Liam said with discovery. Don't drop it on your foot. Liam set it down with exaggerated care. Ethan looked at the woman. You can stay in the back room through the weekend, he said. I'll figure out the rest from there. She opened her mouth. Don't say you can't accept it, he said. You can. You're going to. Your son is 7 years old and it's 40 degrees out. He's 6, she said quietly. Then he definitely needs a room with a door. She looked at him for a long moment. That working gaze again, reading, assessing, running through every version of what this might mean, what it might cost, what the catch was. He let her look. He didn't have anything to hide from it. Okay, she said finally. The same word she'd said in the diner. Not thank you, just okay. Which was, he was starting to understand, how she said yes to things she didn't have a better option for. The weekend passed in the specific awkward way of people sharing space they hadn't planned to share. He gave them the back room and stayed out of it. He came in Saturday afternoon to work on a personal project, an old Indian motorcycle he'd been rebuilding for 2 years, the kind of thing that had no deadline because the deadline was when he felt like it. And she came out at some point and asked if there was anything she could do to help. Not to be polite. She said it the way someone says it when sitting still makes them feel like they're losing their mind. He handed her a rag and told her she could help him clean the carburetor parts he'd soaked overnight. She did it carefully. Better than carefully. Methodically, precisely, without needing to be told twice about any step. She had small hands that moved efficiently, without hesitation. You've done this before? He asked. No, she said, but I can follow a pattern. Liam was in the corner drawing something on a paper bag with a pen he'd found, making sound effects for whatever was happening in whatever world he was drawing. His name's really Liam? Ethan asked. She didn't look up from the part she was cleaning. Yes. Is Carol really yours? A pause. Then, no. Okay. That was the whole conversation. He didn't push. She didn't offer. They worked for 2 hours on the motorcycle parts, and Liam showed him the drawing when he was done. A spaceship of some kind with a very detailed engine section that Liam explained was based on what he could see of the car lift. That's good, Ethan said, and meant it. Liam looked at him with the serious eyes that didn't quite match his age. Do you fix motorcycles too? I'm fixing one right now. Can I watch? Sure. He let the boy sit on the stool near the workbench while he explained what he was doing, keeping it simple, using the words Liam could track. The woman, not Carol, stood near the back wall and watched Ethan talking to her son. He didn't look at her directly. He didn't need to. Sunday moved slower. She found the small shelf of paperbacks he kept in the back room, mechanics' manuals mostly, but a few novels that had drifted in from various places, and she read while Liam slept in the afternoon. She made tea on the single burner he kept for late nights and offered him a cup when he came in from the shop, which he accepted. They sat at the workbench and drank tea. I need to make a call tomorrow, she said. A lawyer. Okay. If the number traces anywhere, it shouldn't. I need to know if that puts... I don't have anything here worth protecting, he said. The shop is insured. I have a good lawyer too, if you need a reference. She looked at him. Your lawyer does family law? Divorce, he said. Not mine. A friend's. But she was good. She nodded slowly, turned the mug in her hands. Why are you doing this? He thought about it. The honest answer wasn't a simple one, and he wasn't a man who gave dishonest answers to cover up complicated ones. He said, I don't know yet. I'm working on it. She accepted this. She was, he was starting to understand, a woman who accepted honest uncertainty more readily than confident reassurance, probably because she'd been given enough confident reassurances in her life that turned out to be lies. Monday morning, Marcus arrived at 8 and opened the shop and was confronted with a woman making tea in the break room. He came and found Ethan immediately, with the energy of someone reporting a significant development. "There's a lady in this break room." "I know." "And a kid." "I know." Marcus looked at him. Marcus was 24 years old and had the face of someone who asked a lot of questions and the wisdom to know which ones not to ask. He looked at Ethan for a long moment. Then he said, "Okay, you want me to start on the Silverado?" "Please," Ethan said. That was the entirety of Marcus's processing period, which was one of his best qualities. The woman found Deb that same morning, walked the 6 blocks to Marlowe's, came in before the lunch rush, sat at the counter. Ethan heard about this from Deb later, in a text that said simply, "She came in, we talked, I gave her the job, cash for now, under a different name. Don't ask me." He texted back, "I wasn't going to." Deb, "Yes, you were." He put his phone in his pocket. Her name, the name she was using, was Carol Webb. She started at the diner on Wednesday, covering the afternoon shift. She was a competent server in the way that surprised the other staff at first. She moved fast. She remembered orders. She had a way with difficult customers that wasn't exactly warmth, but was effective in the way that good management is effective. Deb watched her work the first afternoon with an expression that said she was revising several assumptions. "Where'd you work before?" one of the other servers, Angie, asked during a slow moment. "Different things," Carol said, which was technically true. Liam, meanwhile, had been enrolled in nothing, which was a problem Ethan raised with her on Wednesday evening when she came back to the workshop after her shift. "I know," she said, before he could get past the first sentence. "He needs school." "I know. I can't enroll him without documentation that ties back to—" She stopped. Recalibrated. "It's complicated." "Can you get documentation that doesn't tie back?" She looked at him. "Possibly. I have someone who can help with that, but it takes time." "How much time?" "I don't know." He nodded. "There's a woman 3 streets over who does home tutoring," he said. "She does it for the kids in the building who miss school for various reasons. She doesn't ask a lot of questions. Her name is Mrs. Felton. She's 68 years old, and she charges $40 a week, which I'll cover until you can." The woman stared at him. "You've been thinking about this," she said. "I think about problems when I have them," he said. "It's faster than not thinking about them." She was quiet for a moment, not offended, something more careful than that, like she was picking up an object she wasn't sure she was allowed to touch. "You don't know me," she said. "No," he agreed. "I could be anyone." "You could be," he said, "but you're not. You're a woman with a 6-year-old and a bruise on your kid's face that someone else put there, and you picked a wrench up off my floor the second you heard the door open, which means you've been in situations where you needed one before." He paused. "That's enough to work with." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked away. Out at the shop floor where Marcus was still working on the Silverado, moving around under it with a flashlight, radio on, ordinary, humming. "My name isn't Carol," she said. "I know. I'm not going to tell you what it is yet." "Okay." "Not because I don't—" She stopped. "Because the less you know, the less he can—" Another stop. She wasn't usually imprecise, which meant the topic was making her so. "It's safer for you." "I appreciate that," he said. "But I'm not particularly scared of what's coming, whatever it is." She turned back to look at him. "You should be," she said. "Not dramatically, factually. The way you'd say it's going to rain while looking at the sky." He held her gaze. "Probably," he said. "But that's my problem to worry about." She let out a breath. Not quite a sigh. The specific exhale of someone who has been managing everything alone for long enough that being offered help by someone who doesn't immediately run from the implications is genuinely disorienting. "I'll call Mrs. Felton tomorrow," he said. "If you want." "Yeah," she said. "Okay." Gieße. The weeks moved in the way weeks do when people are building something without naming it, day by day, without a plan, shaped by habit and necessity. Liam started his sessions with Mrs. Felton on the first Thursday of November, carried there and back each day by whoever was free. Ethan, when the shop was quiet. The not Carol woman, on her days off from the diner. Mrs. Felton was exactly as Ethan had described. 68 years old, deeply unbothered by the unconventional, and the kind of teacher who could tell within 3 sessions where a child's mind actually lived. She told Ethan on week 2 that Liam was bright and ahead in math, and that whoever had been reading with him had done it right. He mentioned this to the woman that evening, neutrally, not looking up from the transmission fluid he was changing. She went very still for a moment. Then she said, "I read to him every night, since he was born." "It shows," he said. She didn't say anything else for a while, but she stayed there in the doorway to the shop, watching Liam try to convince Marcus to let him hold the flashlight while Marcus worked, and something in her face was quieter than usual. The working look, resting. The workshop back room was not meant for 2 people to live in. It was barely meant for 1. Ethan found himself doing small things, without announcement. He brought a second blanket one morning, just left it folded on the cot. He found a small portable lamp at a garage sale and set it on the shelf because the overhead fluorescent was too harsh for nighttime. He moved the boxes that had been stacked against one wall into the parts storage room, which freed up about 6 square feet that was functionally meaningless but made the room feel slightly less like a storage unit. She noticed all of it. She didn't comment on any of it, but he'd catch her sometimes in the shop doorway in the evenings, watching him work, and there was something in the watching that was different from suspicion now. It was more like someone learning to believe in a thing gradually, against their own prior experience. She was a hard worker. He learned that fast. She covered double shifts at the diner when Deb needed her, took on the organizational tasks nobody else wanted, and had apparently restructured Deb's supply ordering system within 2 weeks to eliminate a redundancy that had been costing the diner an extra $200 a month without anyone noticing. "How did she even see that?" Deb asked Ethan on a Tuesday, not for the first time sounding like she was marveling at something. "She thinks in systems," Ethan said, which he'd noticed too. She saw patterns fast, cost structures, scheduling inefficiencies, the dozen small things that most people accept as fixed because they've always been that way. She'd done the same thing in his shop within the first week. Not intrusively, not presumptuously, just mentioned once that the parts reorder system seemed like it was creating delays. And did he want her to take a look at it? He'd said yes, partly out of curiosity about what she'd find. She'd found 3 things, all real, all fixable. She'd laid them out on paper with the specificity of someone accustomed to briefing rooms and decision makers. He'd looked at the paper and then looked at her. "What did you do before?" he asked. "Not Carol, you." She met his eyes, the working look again, deciding how much. "I ran a company," she said. Mid-size, supply chain, which was true and was also the way someone describes owning a billion-dollar operation when they're trying to sound ordinary. "Was it successful?" he asked. A small pause. "Yes." "What happened to it?" "Nothing. It's still running. Other people are running it while I'm—" She gestured vaguely at the workshop. "While you're hiding," he said. "While I'm making sure my son is safe," she said, with a directness that closed the subject. He nodded. He didn't push. But that was the week the shape of things started to change slightly. Not dramatically. Not the way it would change later, in ways that were harder. Just a slow shift in the air. He knew a little more. She'd given him a piece of the truth, carefully, deliberately, like handing someone a glass that might break. He'd taken it without making anything of it. That seemed to matter. She started talking to him more in the evenings. Small things at first. A problem at the diner, something Liam had said that was funny in the specific way 6-year-old logic is funny. He'd respond in kind. His side of the exchange was usually shorter than hers, which was his nature, but he was present in it, actually listening, not just waiting for his turn. "You don't say much," she said one evening, not critically. "I say what I mean," he said. "There just isn't always a lot to say." She considered this. "Most people fill the silence. Most people are uncomfortable in it. Aren't you?" "No," he said. Then, because it was honest, "Not usually." "What makes you uncomfortable?" she asked, and then immediately looked like she hadn't meant to ask it. He thought about it. "People telling me they're fine when they're not," he said. "Wastes everybody's time." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the motorcycle. He'd been working on it at the bench, and she'd been watching. Liam, long since asleep. The engine was coming along. Not done, but recognizable now as what it was going to be. "I'm not fine," she said. Not to him exactly, more like a thing said aloud to test how it sounded. "I know," he said. "You don't have to be." She was quiet. Then, "Does it get better? The not being fine?" He looked at the engine. He thought about Friday nights in a diner booth for 3 years. He thought about the specific quality of a house when someone who used to be in it is no longer anywhere. "Different," he said. "It gets different. That's the most honest thing I can tell you." She nodded slowly. Not satisfied exactly, but accepting. Outside, November had fully arrived. The trees stripped down, the cold dry and insistent. Crestfield had its specific winter personality now. The corner store putting plastic over the door, the kids in heavier coats, everyone walking a little faster between places. Inside the workshop, the heater ran steadily, and the Indian motorcycle was taking shape, and Marcus had figured out the flashlight situation with Liam by the simple method of buying him his own small flashlight, which Liam now carried everywhere, including Mrs. Felton's, including apparently to bed. Deb came by one Friday with soup, the 6th time, she reminded Ethan, as she'd promised herself she'd keep count, and sat in the shop drinking coffee while he changed a water pump. "She's good," Deb said. "At the diner." "I know. Better than good. She's running my front of house better than anyone I've had in 20 years, and I'm paying her $15 an hour under a false name." Deb shook her head. "Who is she, Ethan?" "Not mine to say." Deb looked at him. She had the eyes of a woman who had known him long enough to read the spaces between his words. "You like her," she said. He kept his eyes on the water pump. "She's good with her son." "That's not what I said." "Deb." "I'm just noting, Deb." She drank her coffee. "Fine," she said. "Not fine. The opposite of fine." "How are you, though? Actually." He sat back and looked at her. "I'm okay. It's November. You didn't come in last Friday." He paused. He hadn't. He'd been at the shop late on Friday, working on the motorcycle, and somewhere around 7 had realized he'd missed his window. He'd sat there for a while after he realized it, expecting to feel something bad, and found instead just a kind of stillness. "No," he said. "I didn't." Deb looked at him carefully. "Is that okay?" He thought about it. The honest answer was that he didn't know. It wasn't a decision. He hadn't planned to miss it, but something in the rhythm of the weeks had shifted, and the missing hadn't been an absence so much as an absorption, all that time and ritual energy going somewhere else instead. "I don't know yet," he said. "I think it might be." Deb didn't push. She finished her coffee. She squeezed his arm on the way out, the same way she always did, and left without saying anything else. He sat in the shop for a while after she left. From the back room he could hear faint sounds. The woman moving around, Liam asking something, a quiet answer. The small ordinary sounds of people doing what people do when they're trying to make a temporary space feel like something that will hold them. He didn't know how long he could maintain this. He didn't know how long she needed. He didn't know who Victor Hayes was, though the name had surfaced once. She'd been on the phone in the back room, not knowing he was just outside the door, and he'd heard her say the name in a way that made his jaw tighten before he even knew he was reacting. He didn't know what was coming. He knew it was coming. That much was clear. But for tonight, the shop was warm, the motorcycle was almost itself, and the sounds from the back room were ordinary. For tonight, that was something. He held on to it the way you hold on to things that are good before you know how long they last. Not too tight, not loose, just present. He picked up the wrench and went back to work. The Indian motorcycle was done by the 3rd week of November. Ethan had been working on it for 2 years, on and off whenever the shop was slow, or he needed something to do with his hands that wasn't thinking, and he hadn't planned to finish it by any particular date. But things had been moving differently lately, his evenings filling up in ways that meant the motorcycle got more consistent attention, and one Tuesday night, around 10, he tightened the last thing that needed tightening and sat back on the stool and looked at it. It was good work. Clean. Not perfect. There was a small asymmetry in the left panel he'd noticed too late to fix without redoing a significant portion, and the paint was a shade darker than he'd originally wanted because the supplier had substituted without telling him. But the engine was sound, the lines were right, and the thing had a presence that it hadn't had when it came to him in pieces out of a storage unit 3 states away. He was still looking at it when he heard the back room door open. She came out in the oversized sweatshirt she'd been wearing as pajamas. His, technically, one of the ones he kept in the office closet for late nights, and stopped when she saw the motorcycle. "You finished it," she said. "Yeah." She walked over slowly and stood next to him, both of them looking at it. It was the first time she'd seen it as a complete object rather than an assembly of parts, and she looked at it the way she looked at things she was genuinely trying to understand. Seriously, without performance. "It's beautiful," she said. "The left panel's off," he said. "I see it," she said. "It's still beautiful." He didn't argue. She sat down on the other stool, the one Marcus usually occupied, and pulled her knees up inside the sweatshirt. She was tired. She'd done a double at the diner that day, and her feet showed it. But she had the particular late-night energy of someone whose mind wouldn't stop when their body wanted to. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah." "Your wife," she said. "What was she like?" He'd been waiting for that question for weeks, not from her specifically, just in general, from the universe, the way questions accumulate around the shape of an absence. He'd heard it from people before and usually answered it with adjectives that were true but incomplete. Kind, smart, funny when she wanted to be. A nurse, which meant she had a very specific relationship with both suffering and dark humor. She was impatient, he said, which surprised him as the first thing that came out. Not mean, just, she moved fast. She'd see what needed doing and start doing it before anyone else had registered the problem. It could be maddening. "Sounds like a quality," she said. It was. It was also exhausting sometimes. He paused. She used to reorganize the kitchen every few months because she'd figure out a more efficient way to do it. I'd reach for something in the same spot I'd put it for 5 years, and it would be somewhere else, every time. "Did it bother you?" "Every time, Uttan," he said. "And every time the new way was actually better, which bothered me more." She made a small sound that was the closest she came to a laugh, when she was genuinely tired, not performed, just the real quiet version of it. "What happened to her?" she asked. Then immediately, "You don't have to say." "Cancer," he said. "Fast kind. 4 months between diagnosis and..." He stopped. 4 months was not a long time to have something and then not have it anymore. Even now, saying the number felt wrong, like it belonged to a different story than the one he'd actually lived through. She was 31. How old was Danny? 5. He looked at his hands. He remembers her, but it's... You know how memories go when you're that young. They're impressions more than events. He remembers how she smelled. He remembers her laugh. He doesn't always remember the specific things. She was quiet for a moment. "That might be okay," she said carefully. "The impressions. They might hold him in ways he doesn't know yet." He looked at her. It was a careful thing to say. Careful in the way of someone who had thought about it, not just reached for comfort. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe." She looked back at the motorcycle. "Does Danny know about the diner?" she asked. "The Friday thing?" "He knows we go there," Ethan said. "He comes sometimes when he's not at school or my mother's. He never asks about the second plate." A pause. "Kids understand more than they ask about." She was quiet again. Outside, the wind moved through the alley behind the shop, rattling something loose somewhere on the roof. The space heater ticked. "Liam asked about his father last week," she said, not leading anywhere, just saying it. "He asked when we were going to go home." "What did you tell him?" "I told him home is wherever we are right now." She pulled the sweatshirt tighter. "He thought about it for a while and then said this place smells like oil." A pause. "I think he meant it as an observation, not a complaint." "It does smell like oil," Ethan said. "It smells like something," she said, "like a place that's been used. I don't mean that..." She paused again, finding words. "My penthouse didn't smell like anything. It was climate controlled. Everything was controlled." She said the word like it had two meanings, one of which wasn't about temperature. He understood both. Liam used to leave his shoes by the door and I'd walk around them for weeks because I didn't want to move them, she said. He'd pull them up exactly where he dropped them and forget about them 5 minutes later, and they'd just be there, in the middle of the entry hall. And I thought about how my interior designer would have... She stopped. I missed those shoes the moment we left. I keep thinking about those shoes. He didn't say anything. He just let her say it. I know that's not the important thing, she said. I know the important thing is that we're out. I know what he would have... She stopped again, and this time something in her face went briefly wrong and then corrected itself. The correcting was the hard part to watch, the way she pulled it back with the habit of long practice. I know we made the right choice. I just didn't know I'd miss a pair of shoes. You're allowed to miss things, he said. I know. Not just the big things. She looked at him. I know, she said again, but differently this time, like it was something she was trying to believe rather than something she'd already accepted. They sat there for a while longer. The heater ran. The motorcycle stood in the light looking like what it was. Something finished, something whole, made out of parts that had been broken. She went back to bed eventually. He sat for another 20 minutes with a cup of coffee that went cold, and then he went home to Carver Street, and the house was quiet the way it always was, and he stood in the kitchen for a moment, and for the first time in a while, the quiet felt like a specific thing rather than an absence. He wasn't sure what to do with that. He put his keys on the hook and went to bed. Danny came home the following weekend and immediately, with the uncanny social radar of an 8-year-old, sensed that the situation at his father's shop was unusual. He didn't say anything about it directly. What he did was show up at the workshop on Saturday morning with Ethan and find Liam there, and the two of them had the kind of rapid, wordless size-up that children perform, and then Liam said, "Do you know about the lift?" And Danny said, "What lift?" And that was the end of any social complexity between them. By noon, they were conducting what appeared to be an engineering survey of the entire shop, with Liam providing expert commentary based on his 6 weeks of daily exposure and Danny asking questions that revealed a mechanical curiosity Ethan had noticed but not fully appreciated until now. The woman, Victoria, Ethan had started thinking of her by that name, though he still hadn't said it aloud, having picked it up from a half-visible name on a document she'd been reading and left folded on the workbench. Watched the two boys from the doorway of the break room with an expression he couldn't read completely. Later, when the boys were in the back room and Ethan and Marcus were working, she came and stood near the bench. "Your son is good," she said. "He's a good kid," Ethan agreed. "He has his moments." "He showed Liam how to read the tire pressure gauge," she said. "Explained the whole thing, patient about it, 8 years old." "He's patient about things he cares about," Ethan said. "The things he doesn't care about, less so." "Sounds like his father." He glanced at her. She was looking at the bench, not at him, but the corner of her mouth was doing something. "Don't tell him I said that," she said. "Wasn't planning on it," he said. Marcus, working quietly on the other side of the lift, said nothing, which was his way of being part of a conversation without entering it. The afternoon moved easily in the way some afternoons do when no one is forcing anything. Deb brought food around 3, so she did this sometimes on Saturdays, arriving with a bag from the diner kitchen and the air of someone dropping in completely by accident. And they all ate on the shop floor because the break room table only seated 3 and no one wanted to make a formal thing of it. The 5 of them, Ethan, Danny, Liam, the woman, Marcus, sat on crates and upturned buckets with diner food and the radio playing and the Indian motorcycle visible in the corner, finished, gleaming under the shop lights. Deb looked at the motorcycle and said, "Lord, Ethan, you should put that somewhere people can see it." "It's somewhere people can see it," he said. "People plural," Deb said. Liam looked at the motorcycle and then at Ethan and said, very seriously, "I looked at it this morning and I think the left panel is a little off." Marcus made a sound. Danny said, "What's wrong with the left panel?" And Liam began explaining with the authority of someone who had spent weeks absorbing information from a primary source. Ethan caught the woman's eyes across the space. She was already looking at him, and something passed between them. Not a full thing, not named, just a recognition. The ordinary improbability of this particular afternoon. These particular people on these particular buckets. She looked away first. The 1st of December arrived with a cold front, and the information, delivered by the lawyer the woman called on a Thursday, that Victor Hayes had filed a motion in civil court claiming she had violated the terms of a mutual custody agreement that did not, to her knowledge, exist. Ethan knew something was wrong before she said anything. He came in from the shop and she was standing in the break room with her phone in both hands and her face doing the thing it did when she was managing something that wanted to be bigger than she was letting it. "What happened?" he asked. She told him. He listened. He asked 3 specific questions. What was the filing date, which court, and who was representing Hayes, and when she answered, he nodded and didn't say anything for a moment. "He's manufacturing documentation," he said. "He's done it before," she said. "He had paperwork for things that didn't happen, agreements I didn't sign. His legal team is—" She stopped. "He has a lot of resources." "So do you." "Not accessible ones, not right now." She pressed her lips together. "My accounts are frozen. Not all of them. I moved some things before I left, but the main ones. His legal team filed a motion for asset discovery 2 months ago, and it moved faster than it should have, which means someone was expediting it," Ethan said. "Someone was paid to expedite it," she said. He sat down on the edge of the break room table. Not because he was tired, because he was thinking, and he thought better when he took up less vertical space. "Your lawyer," he said, "the one you've been calling. How solid is she?" "She's excellent. She's also 60 miles away and working against a timeline that he's controlling." "What does she need?" "Affidavits. Documentation of the living situation, evidence that Liam is stable and cared for, character witnesses who can testify to—" She stopped again, looked at him directly. "She needs people willing to put themselves on record." The air in the break room was very still. "Okay," he said. "Ethan, I said okay. If you do that, if you sign anything, if you appear anywhere in any document connected to this, he will come after you. He will look into your shop, your finances, your history. He will find something or he will manufacture something and he will use it." "Let him," Ethan said. She stared at him. "That's not—" "Victoria," he said. The name landed in the room between them. She went completely still. He hadn't planned to say it. It had come out because it was her name and he was tired of talking around it. He watched her absorb it. The fact that he knew it, the fact that he'd been sitting on it. "How long have you known?" she said. "Few weeks. You left something on the bench." She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she was somewhere between furious and something he couldn't name. "I was careful." "You were careful enough," he said. "I wasn't looking for it. I looked away when I registered what I was seeing." He paused. "I wasn't going to use it." "I know," she said. Then, like she was surprised she'd said it, I know you weren't." The silence held for a moment. "Victoria Langford," he said. "I didn't look much further than the name. I didn't look you up." "Why not?" "Because you'd tell me what you wanted me to know when you were ready to tell me." He shrugged. "That's your call, not mine." She sat down on the other chair, the one across from him. The space between them was small. The break room barely fit 2 people sitting, and she looked at him with an expression that was stripped of the usual calculation. Just her, tired and cornered, and something else. Something he didn't have a clean name for. "My company is worth approximately $2.4 billion, she said. "I have a board of directors who are currently running it in my absence under a contingency protocol I set up 3 years ago because I had a feeling, just a feeling I couldn't prove anything then, that I might need to disappear quickly someday." She paused. "My liquid assets outside the frozen accounts are about $200,000 spread across 3 accounts he doesn't know exist. My lawyer's name is Sandra Osei. She has been building a case against Victor Hayes for 14 months, which he does not know." Ethan listened. "He is not just my ex," she said. He embedded himself in my company before I understood what he was doing. He moved people, cultivated relationships with board members. By the time I saw the structure of what he'd built, He had leverage in 6 places I cared about. She looked at her hands. Liam's bruise wasn't the first thing. It was the thing that made it impossible to pretend the other things were accidents. Ethan's jaw tightened. I left the night it happened, she said. I had the bag packed for 3 months. I walked out when he was on a call. Her voice was level. Not the level of someone suppressing feeling, the level of someone who had gone over this so many times that the feeling had worn grooves, and she'd learned to speak in them without falling in. He found us twice before Crestfield. I don't know how he found the hotel. I'm still not sure. Cell signal? Ethan said. I'd switched phones. He could have gotten to the cell carrier. She shook her head. His resources aren't just money. It's the network. People who owe him favors or owe him money or are afraid of him. Is he afraid of anything? She thought about it. Exposure, she said. He spent his entire career managing his image. He can't stand the idea of the public seeing him as anything other than what he's built. A pause. He's never been successfully prosecuted for anything. He's never been in a room where someone had more power than him. Ethan was quiet for a moment. What's the court date? He said. The motion hearing is December 19th. Sandra says if we can get the custody filing challenged on procedural grounds, which she believes we can, because the documentation he submitted has inconsistencies she can identify. We can buy time. But she needs people on record. She needs evidence that Liam is in a stable environment. She needs... She stopped. I didn't plan to need any of this from you. Plans change, he said. I brought this to your door, she said. Deb brought it to my door, he said. You were soaking wet. She looked at him. Something in her face moved, not breaking exactly, but shifting, the way ice shifts in early spring when the structure underneath has been changing for weeks, and then one day the surface shows it. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. Do what? Rely on someone, she said. I know how to manage things. I know how to build things. I know how to plan and execute and negotiate. She paused. I don't know how to trust someone to stand in a room and tell the truth about me. You don't have to know how, he said. I just have to do it. She looked at him for a long time. He's going to come here, she said, when the motion gets challenged, when Sandra starts pushing back. He's going to want to see where Liam is. He's going to... Let him come, Ethan said. Ethan. I mean it. He met her eyes. I've been in this shop for 6 years. My name is on the door. I'm not moving. She looked at him with the working look, but it was slower now. Less like assessment, more like she was memorizing something she wanted to keep. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? I didn't let myself expect anything, she said. That was the whole point. He understood that. The week before the December 19th hearing moved fast and badly, in the way weeks move when something large is approaching that you can't stop. Sandra Osei drove up on a Tuesday and met with Victoria in the break room for 3 hours, a yellow legal pad filling with notes and handwriting so small and dense it looked like a different language. Ethan sat in the shop and changed brake pads and listened to the low hum of the 2 women's voices without being able to make out words. Sandra came out at some point and found him under a Civic, tapped the side of the car and said, I hear you're willing to testify. He rolled out on the creeper. She was a small woman, 50-something, natural hair, glasses, wearing a coat that meant business in the specific way certain coats do. Yes, he said. Do you understand what that means in this context? She said. Victor Hayes has a litigation team that will go through your life with a microscope. Your finances, your business, your history. They'll look for anything they can use to discredit you. I know. What? And I have a 6-year-old shop that's in the black. I pay my taxes. I have a parking ticket from 2021. And I once got into a fight outside a bar when I was 24 that resulted in a warning and no charges. He paused. They're welcome to look. Sandra studied him for a moment with the particular eye of someone who has spent decades learning to read people quickly. All right, she said. It was Liam who noticed first. He came into the shop on a Thursday afternoon and found Ethan at the bench and said without preamble, There was a man outside Mrs. Felton's today. Ethan set down the part he was working with. What kind of man? In a car, a black one. Nice. Liam frowned. He was looking at me. Did he talk to you? No, Mrs. Felton came out to call me in and he drove away. Liam paused. He had on a suit. Ethan kept his face neutral. How long was he there? I don't know. I saw him when I came outside for a minute. He was still there when I went back in. Liam looked at Ethan with those old-for-his-age eyes. Was he looking for us? Ethan sat on the stool and looked at Liam directly. He thought about lying and rejected it because Liam was a child who had been underestimated by the adults around him for most of his life, and he didn't deserve more of that. Maybe, he said. I'm going to take care of it. How? I'm going to make some calls, Ethan said, and I'm going to talk to your mom, and then we're all going to figure it out together. Liam thought about this. Do you promise? He asked. It was the question behind the question, not about the man in the car, not about the logistics. It was the question a 6-year-old asks when he has learned not to trust easily and he is standing in front of someone who might be worth it. Ethan held his gaze. Yes, he said. Liam nodded. He picked up the small flashlight Marcus had given him, clicked it on and off once, and went back toward the break room. Ethan sat on the stool for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Sandra. He's having her surveilled, he said when she answered. I know, Sandra said. We saw the same car last week near the diner. I've already filed a motion flagging potential harassment. A pause. This is good for us, actually. It demonstrates the pattern. It's also a 6-year-old being followed to his tutor, Ethan said, and his voice had an edge to it that didn't usually show. I know, Sandra said, and she meant it. The hearing is in 11 days. We're going to get there. He hung up and went to find Victoria. She was in the break room reading through documents Sandra had left, marking things in pencil with the concentrated focus of someone who had spent years learning to absorb information fast and fight with it. She looked up when he came in. He told her about the car. He watched her face do the thing it did. The fast intake, the management of it, the surface going still while underneath the processing happened. Mrs. Felton's, she said. Yeah. He's tightening the circle, she said. It wasn't panic. It was the voice of someone who recognized a tactic they'd been anticipating. Sandra's filing something, he said. I know, she told me. She set down the papers. He's doing this to rattle me, to make me feel like I can't hold a perimeter. If I react, if I move again, if I run, it looks like instability. It looks like I can't provide a stable environment for Liam. She was speaking fast now, thinking out loud in a way she rarely did. He wants me to run. If I run, he has grounds. If I stay, he has to walk into a courtroom, Ethan said. She stopped. Which is the one room where his money doesn't make the rules, Ethan said. It buys influence. It doesn't buy the verdict. Not against what Sandra has. She looked at him. You sound sure, she said. I'm not, he said. But one of us has to be, and you're running the logistics right now. A small breath, not quite a laugh. The almost version again. Okay, she said. Stay, he said. Don't move, don't react, let him come. And if he shows up here, she said, physically, not a lawyer, not a car on the street, him. Then I'll be here, Ethan said. She held his gaze. He didn't look away. The thing between them that had no name was there again. The same thing from the night of the motorcycle, from the afternoon on the buckets, from the break room where he'd said her name for the first time. It was building, had been building for weeks, in the space between two people who have been careful and whose carefulness is slowly running out of room. Neither of them said anything about it. I'm going to call Danny tonight, Ethan said. He's at my mother's. I want him to stay there until after the 19th. Her face changed slightly. She understood why. I'm sorry, she said, that you have to do that. It's temporary, he said. I know. She paused. Does your mother know? Enough, he said. She knows I have people staying at the shop and that there's a situation. She didn't ask for details and I didn't give them. She's practical. She sounds like you. She's where I got it from, he said. He left her with the documents and went back to the shop. Marcus was locking the tool chest end of his day. He looked at Ethan with the expression he used when he had something to say and was deciding whether to say it. Say it, Ethan said. This is going somewhere, Marcus said. The whole... He gestured vaguely at the workshop. Situation. I know. Are you good? Ethan thought about the question in the way Marcus meant it. Not just are you managing, but are you okay with what you're stepping into? Is this where you want to be? Yeah, he said. I think I am. Marcus nodded. He picked up his bag. At the door, he stopped. That little kid told me today that the left panel on the motorcycle is off, he said. He's been saying it for 2 weeks. I looked at it again. He's right, you know. I know, Ethan said. Marcus shook his head like this was a minor personal failure, pulled the door open, and left. Ethan stood alone in the shop. The motorcycle was in the corner. The fluorescent lights buzzed. From the break room, he could hear the faint sound of Victoria on the phone. Sandra, probably, or someone from her company, her voice low and precise and working. Outside, Crestfield moved through its evening, indifferent to everything that was happening inside Walker's auto. The laundromat across the alley glowed orange. Somewhere down the block, a dog was making its feelings known about something. 11 days to the hearing. He didn't know what those 11 days would bring. He knew that whatever was coming, it was coming whether he was ready or not. He'd learned that lesson once before, at 30 years old, standing in a hospital corridor at 4 a.m. while a doctor explained the words, no further treatment options, in the specific clinical language designed to deliver the worst news in the most manageable form. He'd been ready for that, and it hadn't mattered. He hadn't been ready for the diner booth afterward, the 2 cups of coffee every Friday, the years of ritual grief. He hadn't been ready for a woman in a wet coat on a stormy October evening, or for the sound of a hungry child eating, or for any of what had followed. Ready wasn't the point. You showed up. You stayed. You did what the moment required. He picked up his keys and turned off the shop lights, leaving only the work lamp on in the corner the way he always did, and the motorcycle glowed in the low light like something that had been waiting a long time to be exactly what it was. The black car came back on a Monday. Not to Mrs. Felton's this time. It parked across from Walker's auto at 8:15 in the morning and stayed there for 2 hours, engine off, someone sitting in the driver's seat that Ethan couldn't make out clearly through the tinted glass. He noticed it when he pulled in, registered it without reacting, went inside, and started his day. He told Marcus when Marcus arrived at 8:30, "Don't look at it directly," he said. "Just work." Marcus, to his credit, didn't look at it directly. He just worked. Victoria saw it from the break room window at 9. She came out into the shop and stood next to Ethan at the bench and said, quietly, "That's not his driver. His driver is bigger." "So it's someone he hired," Ethan said. "He has a firm he uses. Private investigators, security, legal support. They're all connected." She paused. "He's documenting the address, making sure it's real before he moves." "How long before he moves?" "The hearing is in 8 days," she said. "He'll do something before then. He always does something before then. He can't stand waiting for the room. He needs to feel like he's already won before he walks in." Ethan set down the wrench he'd been using. "Sandra, no?" "I texted her already. She's filing an emergency motion to extend the restraining order we have in family court to cover this address." She paused. "It may or may not move fast enough. And if it doesn't, then he walks up to that door," she said. He looked at her. "And I'm standing behind it," he said. She met his eyes. She'd stopped arguing with statements like that 2 weeks ago, had stopped trying to talk him out of the position he'd taken, which was simple and apparently immovable. He was here, she was here, Liam was here, and that was the sum of it. She hadn't agreed out loud. She'd just stopped disagreeing, which he understood as her version of the same thing. The car left at 10:15. No one got out. It just pulled away. That was worse somehow. The sitting and watching and leaving without resolution. It was a message that didn't need words. "I know where you are." The call from Sandra came on Wednesday evening. Ethan was in the shop, working late on a Honda Pilot that needed a new alternator, when Victoria came out with her phone and her face in the careful arrangement that meant the news was neither good nor bad, but was complicated. "The procedural challenge worked," she said. "The custody motion, the one based on the documentation he fabricated, it's been challenged. The judge has flagged the inconsistencies. Sandra thinks there's a real chance it gets thrown out entirely at the hearing." "That's good," Ethan said. Yes, she said. And he knows it is. Sandra got a call from his legal team this afternoon. They're offering to settle. Drop the custody motion, release the frozen assets, in exchange for… She stopped. He waited. In exchange for me dropping any potential criminal complaint against him, she said, for Liam's injury, and for anything else. The shop was very quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when something lands hard. Anything else, Ethan said. The pattern of behavior, the documented incidents, the 2 years of things that Sandra has built into a file that, if it goes to criminal court, becomes something he can't contain. She set her phone on the bench. He's offering to give me back my life in exchange for letting him walk away clean. Ethan looked at her. What did you tell Sandra? I told her I needed to think about it, she said, which is what you tell a lawyer when you need 20 minutes to figure out what you actually want to do. What do you actually want to do? She put both hands flat on the bench surface. Her jaw was set in the way it got when she was working against something inside herself. The practical answer, she said, is that taking the settlement ends this fast. I get Liam safe. I get my accounts. I get to go back to my life. The case against him in criminal court is not guaranteed, but his lawyers are very good and juries are unpredictable, and the process would take years, and Liam would have to… She stopped. Liam would be in it for years. And the other answer, he said, the other answer is that if he walks away clean, he does it again, she said, to someone else. Someone without my resources, without a Sandra Osei, without a workshop on Delmar Street where someone let them stay. She looked up. And I know that. And I have to live with whichever choice I make. Ethan was quiet for a moment. He turned off the shop light above the Honda and sat on the stool near the bench, which put him at her level. I can't tell you what to do, he said. I'm not asking you to. But I can tell you what I think if you want it. She looked at him. I want it, she said. I think you've been making decisions alone for so long that you've gotten good at the practical answer and you've stopped trusting the other one, he said. I think you know what you want to do. I think you've known since before you called Sandra back. She held his gaze. Something in her face moved. If he walks, she said, it happens again. Yeah, he said. I can't. She stopped. I can't be the reason it happens to someone else. No, he said. You can't. She picked her phone back up. She called Sandra and told her no settlement. Her voice, when she said it, was level and deliberate and completely certain, the voice of someone who has found the ground under their feet after a long time without it. Sandra said, Good. I'll see you in 6 days. Victor Hayes arrived on Friday. Not a black car. Not a PI. Not a lawyer in a suit with a prepared statement. Victor Hayes himself, in person, at 4:30 in the afternoon, driving a dark gray Mercedes that he parked directly in front of Walker's auto in the red zone with the specific confidence of a man who had never in his life received a parking ticket that cost him anything real. Ethan saw him get out through the shop window. He was tall, mid-40s, the kind of physically maintained that comes from personal trainers and controlled eating rather than any love of movement. He had the face of someone who had spent decades calibrating exactly how to look in every room, commanding without being aggressive, accessible without being warm. He was wearing a coat that cost more than the Honda Pilot on the lift. He stood on the sidewalk outside Walker's auto and looked at the sign on the door the way you look at something you've already decided is beneath you. Then he walked to the door and opened it without knocking. Ethan was standing 10 feet away when he came in. He'd been standing there for about 2 minutes since he saw the Mercedes park, working through the specific internal rearrangement that happens when something you've been waiting for stops being abstract. Marcus was at the other lift. He straightened up slowly, reading the room. Hayes looked at Ethan, then at Marcus, then around the shop with the expression of a man doing a rapid and unfavorable assessment of his surroundings. I'm looking for a woman named Victoria Langford, he said. He said her name the way people say the names of things they own. Don't know her, Ethan said. Hayes looked at him. He had pale gray eyes that were very good at conveying that he was not surprised by what he found and was not remotely intimidated by it. I have documentation placing her at this address, he said. I'd suggest you reconsider. You can suggest whatever you want, Ethan said. This is a private business. You're welcome to take your vehicle out of the red zone and leave. Hayes was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that a man deploys when he's deciding which version of himself to use next. Who are you? He said. I own the shop, Ethan said. And you're protecting her, Hayes said. Not a question, an identification of the situation, laid out the way you lay out a problem before you solve it. I don't know what you're talking about, Ethan said. I know you're trespassing. I'm not trespassing. I'm a customer, Hayes said, with a thin smile that didn't reach the gray eyes. I need an oil change. Marcus made a very quiet sound from the other side of the shop. Ethan didn't react. We're fully booked, Ethan said. You'll need to go somewhere else. Hayes took a step further into the shop. Not aggressive. Measured. The step of a man who moves into spaces because he's accustomed to them expanding to accommodate him. I want to see my son, he said, and the word son was carefully weighted, calculated to land as a claim. You don't have a son here, Ethan said. I have a court order. Which Sandra Osei has already filed a counter motion on, Ethan said, and which a judge has flagged for procedural irregularities. You should talk to your lawyers. Hayes's face changed. It was small, a micro-expression, the kind that lasted less than a second. But Ethan caught it. Surprise. Not at the information itself, but at the source of it. He hadn't expected Ethan to know the details. He'd expected a mechanic who'd been told enough to be loyal, but not enough to be effective. He recalibrated. I don't know what she's told you about me, Hayes said, his voice dropping to something almost conversational, the tone shift of a man switching modes. But I want you to understand that Victoria is not well. She's been under enormous pressure, she's made poor decisions, and the people around her sometimes get caught in the middle of that without understanding the full picture. He paused. I'm not your enemy. I'm a father who wants to make sure his son is safe. The bruise on the boy's jaw was 3 weeks old when I met him, Ethan said, fading green at the edges. That's about 4 to 5 days post-impact, which, based on when they arrived here, puts it at, that's at the last time they were in a space where you had access to him, Ethan said. The conversational mode left Hayes's face. The one underneath was quieter and colder. You should be careful, Hayes said. You have a business here. You have a son, I understand. A custody arrangement with your late wife's family, I believe. It would be a shame if that arrangement came under scrutiny. The shop went very quiet. Ethan looked at him. He felt the thing in his chest that had been a slow tightening since the black car first appeared across the street, and he felt it reach a certain point and then, remarkably, go still. Not calm exactly, more like the stillness that comes when you've identified exactly what you're dealing with and the uncertainty is gone. Get out of my shop, he said. Hayes looked at him for a moment. Then he reached into his coat pocket and placed a business card on the workbench nearest the door. When you reconsider, he said, and you will. He left. The door swung shut behind him. Marcus let out a long breath. Okay, he said. That was, call Sandra, Ethan said. I don't have her number. Victoria does. Go get her. Marcus went. Ethan stood at the workbench and looked at the business card. He didn't touch it. He looked at it the way you look at something that is evidence. Victoria came out of the back room with Marcus half a step behind her. She had her phone already in her hand, which meant she'd heard some of it, maybe all of it. Her face was doing something he hadn't seen before. Not the careful management, not the working assessment. It was stripped of all of that. Raw in the specific way of someone who has spent months afraid of a moment, and then the moment happened, and she was still standing. He threatened Danny, she said. Yeah. Ethan, Don't, he said. Don't apologize. He came here because he's scared of the hearing. This is what people do when they're scared and they have resources. He looked at her. Call Sandra right now. Tell her he was here. Tell her what he said about Danny, and tell her we have a witness. He looked at Marcus. Marcus nodded. I heard every word, he said. Victoria called Sandra. She stood by the workbench and relayed everything in precise order. Time of arrival, what was said, the specific threat. Marcus as witness. Sandra's voice on the other end was controlled and rapid, and had an undercurrent of something that sounded almost like satisfaction. He just handed us something, Sandra said. Witness intimidation, direct threat to a third party with the intent to coerce. I'm filing an emergency motion today, and I'm calling the DA's office in the morning. Victoria hung up. She stood there for a moment with the phone in her hand. Then she put it on the workbench and pressed both palms flat on the surface and breathed. Hey, Ethan said. She looked up. He's gone, he said, and he's not coming back here. How do you know? Because he got what he came for, Ethan said. He wanted to see if he could rattle you, to see if you'd run. He paused. You didn't. She held his gaze. Her eyes were bright in a way that wasn't tears exactly, but was adjacent to them. Marcus, Ethan said without looking away from her. Go get food from Oswaldo, whatever's good. I don't need, she started. I didn't ask if you needed it, he said. Marcus went. The shop settled into its quiet. Outside, the Mercedes was gone from the red zone. A city bus moved past the window, ordinary, enormous, indifferent. She sat on the stool. He leaned against the workbench. He's going to go after you in court, she said. What he said about Danny, about the custody arrangement, he'll find someone to file something, make it look like your situation is unstable. He'll try to make you look like a bad character witness. Let him try, Ethan said. Ethan, he has lawyers who do nothing but this. And Sandra has 14 months of documented evidence and a witness to a direct threat made in my shop this afternoon, he said. Those aren't equal positions. She was quiet. She was doing the calculation. He could see it, running the variables the way she always did, looking for the places where it fell apart. What if it's not enough, she said. Then we deal with what's next, he said. You can't plan for every version of how this goes. You can only do the right thing in the room you're in. She looked at him. That's how you live, isn't it? She said. Not a question. An observation. Just the room you're in. It's the only room that's real, he said. She was quiet for a moment. I've been living about 6 rooms ahead my whole life, she said. Contingency plans for the contingency plans, always building exits. A pause. It's exhausting. Yeah, he said. I imagine it is. I didn't know how to stop, she said. I still don't, completely. But lately, she stopped, looked at her hands. Lately, I keep finding myself just in the room I'm in. He didn't say anything. He let it sit where she'd put it. The 4 days between Hayes's visit and the December 19th hearing had a particular texture, tense and slow and fast at the same time, the way time moves when something is coming that you can't speed up or slow down. Sandra filed the emergency motion the morning after Hayes's visit. The motion covered the witness intimidation, the surveillance of a minor, and a formal request to expand the existing restraining order. The judge assigned to the hearing reviewed it and, on Thursday, granted a temporary emergency order prohibiting Hayes from coming within 500 feet of Walker's Auto, Marlowe's Diner, or Mrs. Felton's residence. It was served to Hayes's legal team by 4 in the afternoon. Hayes's lawyers filed 2 counter motions before the end of business Thursday. Ethan's name was in both of them. He found out when Sandra called him directly on Thursday evening. They filed motions challenging your character as a witness, she said. They're claiming you have a history of violent behavior, citing the 2021 incident outside a bar. A warning, he said. No charges. I know. They're also claiming financial impropriety in your business. They've filed a request for Walker's Auto's financial records for the last 3 years. They can have them, he said. A pause. You're sure? I've had the same accountant for 4 years, he said. She's meticulous. Let them look. They're also going to try to characterize the living arrangement here as inappropriate, Sandra said. A single male with an unrelated woman and child in a commercial property. They'll try to make it look... I know what they'll try to make it look like, he said. What do you need from me? An affidavit from your accountant by tomorrow morning. Character references from at least 2 people with no connection to Victoria. And I need you in the courthouse at 9 a.m. on the 19th. Done, he said. He called his accountant, who said nothing except, how soon? And those sons of... And then stopped herself and said she'd have it to Sandra by 8 a.m. He called two people, his mother and Deb. His mother, when he explained the situation, was quiet for a long moment and then said, "I'll write whatever you need. And for the record, I've known about the girl and the child for 3 weeks, and I was waiting for you to tell me yourself." He started to say something, and she said, I'm not mad. I'm proud of you. Write the affidavit." Deb said, "I've been waiting for someone to ask me to put something in writing about Victor Hayes since I first heard that name 3 weeks ago. Tell Sandra I can be anywhere she needs me." He went back into the shop after the calls. Victoria was at the bench, going through Sandra's file for the 4th time, the legal pad covered now in both their handwritings. Hers precise and small, things she'd added during their prep sessions. He sat across from her. "My accountant's got the affidavit," he said. "My mother and Deb are both available as character witnesses." She looked up. "Your mother," she said. "She's been aware for 3 weeks," he said. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. "I'm going to apologize to her." "She'll tell you not to," he said, which is her way of accepting it. Victoria looked at him. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah." "I need to tell you something," she said, "before the 19th, in case it—" She stopped. "In case things get complicated." "Tell me," he said. She set down the legal pad. She looked at the space between them on the bench, and then at him, and she was doing the thing she rarely did, abandoning all the working assessment and just being in her own face. "When I came into that diner," she said, "I had run out of options. Not practically. I still had money. I still had Sandra. I still had a plan." She paused. "I had run out of the ability to believe that any of it would work. That's the part people don't tell you about. When you've been afraid for long enough, it's not the resources that run out. It's the belief that they're real." He listened. "And you put that plate down," she said, and walked away. "And I didn't know what to do with that. I spent 2 days trying to figure out what you wanted for it." She looked at her hands. "I've spent my whole life in rooms where nothing is free, where everything has a cost and the cost is negotiated before or after, but always collected." A pause. "I didn't know how to process someone who just put the plate down." "I didn't want anything for it," he said. "I know that now," she said. "It took me longer than it should have." "It took the appropriate amount of time," he said, "given what you've been through." She looked at him. "I want you to know," she said carefully, "that whatever happens on the 19th, whatever happens after, what you've done here isn't something I'm going to walk away from and not think about. Not Liam, not me, not any of it." She paused. "I'm not good at saying things like this." "You're doing fine," he said. "I'm really not," she said. "I've rewritten this about 6 times in my head." "I could tell," he said. "The first 2 versions were better." She stared at him. Then something broke open in her face. The real laugh, not the almost version, actual and unguarded and surprised at itself. And it changed the whole room, the quality of the air, the way the fluorescent light landed on things. He felt something in his chest that had been careful for a long time. Stop being careful. He didn't say anything about it. Neither did she. But it was there, acknowledged in the way things get acknowledged between 2 people who are paying attention, without announcement, without a plan. They went back to the file. The 19th was a Tuesday. They left the shop at 8:15. Ethan, Victoria, Sandra, who had arrived at 7 with coffee and a focused silence that meant she was in the mode she reserved for courtrooms. Marcus stayed at the shop with Liam, who had been told there was a meeting and that things were going to be okay, and who had looked at Ethan with the serious eyes and said, "You promised," and Ethan had said, "I know." The courthouse was downtown, the kind of building that was built to convey permanence, and mostly conveyed that the ventilation system was from 1987. They found their room and their seats, and Sandra arranged her files with the efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times and knew exactly which paper needed to be on top. Hayes arrived at 8:50 with 3 lawyers and an expression of controlled confidence that Ethan recognized now as the thing Hayes wore when he was performing rather than feeling. Their eyes met across the room. Hayes looked at him the way he'd looked at the sign above Walker's Auto, the rapid dismissal of something that didn't warrant sustained attention. Ethan held his gaze until Hayes looked away first, which he did, turning to say something to the lawyer on his left. The judge was a woman in her late 50s named Harriet Carroll, who came in at exactly 9 and sat down and looked at the room with the expression of someone who had seen every version of this situation and was going to move through it efficiently regardless. The hearing took 3.5 hours. Hayes's lawyers argued the custody motion, the stability of Victoria's living situation, Ethan's character, the finances of Walker's auto, the appropriateness of a commercial property as a residence for a minor. They were good, precise, and well-prepared, and they moved through their points cleanly. Sandra was better. She had the documentation of fabricated custody agreements, inconsistencies in the filing dates, a chain of emails from Hayes's own legal team that had been obtained through discovery, and showed the construction of a false paper trail. She had Marcus's statement about the confrontation at the shop. She had Ethan's financial records, which were clean. She had character statements from Ethan's mother and from Deb Coulson, the latter of which Judge Carroll read with an expression that was professionally neutral, but had something around the edges that was almost approval. She had documentation of the surveillance of Liam at Mrs. Felton's. She had the testimony of Victoria herself, given in the flat, specific, chronological voice of someone who has organized their trauma into evidence and is presenting it as such. And she had the emergency motion, already granted, which had established on the record that Victor Hayes had showed up at Walker's Auto, made specific threats to a third party, and deployed surveillance of a 6-year-old child in the days leading up to a hearing he'd initiated. Judge Carroll recessed at 12:30 and came back at 1:45. She dismissed the custody motion. All of it. The documentation was ruled inadmissible due to procedural irregularities consistent with fraud. The existing temporary restraining order was made permanent. The asset freeze was referred to the civil court for immediate review, with a recommendation for full release. And the matter of Victor Hayes's conduct, the threats, the surveillance, the documented pattern Sandra had laid out, was referred to the DA's office for formal criminal review. Hayes sat very still when she read the last part. His lawyers wrote things. He didn't react visibly. He had the practiced stillness of a man who had been in rooms where things went against him before, though Ethan suspected those rooms were rare. Then he looked across at Victoria, not at his lawyers, not at the judge, at Victoria. And the look on his face was the kind of thing that didn't belong in a legal proceeding, something personal and uncontrolled that lasted about 3 seconds before he locked it back down. Victoria didn't look away from him. She held his gaze with the steady, level composure of someone who has decided that the last thing she is going to give him is the satisfaction of watching her flinch. He looked away first. Outside the courthouse, on the steps, in the cold December air, Sandra stood with her files and said, "The DA contact will be in touch. Don't be surprised if this moves faster than you expect. The referral from a judge carries weight, and the pattern here is well documented." She looked at Victoria. "You did well in there." "You did well in there," Victoria said. "It was collaborative," Sandra said, which Ethan understood as a lawyer's way of being gracious. She shook his hand. "Mr. Walker, the records were clean, by the way. Impeccably clean. Your accountant is excellent." "I'll tell her you said so," he said. Sandra left. They stood on the courthouse steps for a moment in the cold. The city moved below them, indifferent, continuous. Victoria was looking at the street. Her face was doing something he'd never seen on it. Not the working look, not the management, not the almost laugh, just a kind of quietness, like a room after a sound has stopped. "It's not over," she said. "The DA process. His lawyers will—" "I know," he said. "It could take months. He'll have resources for the appeal process if criminal charges." "I know," he said. "I'm not going to pretend this is resolved," she said. "It's not." "No," he said. "But you're standing on these steps, and the order is permanent, and he has a DA referral on his record. And a year ago you were deciding whether the bag you'd packed was going to be enough." He paused. "That's not nothing." She looked at him. The quiet in her face was still there, and under it something else. The thing that had been building for weeks, and had nowhere to go because there'd been no room for it. No moment that wasn't occupied by something urgent and necessary and survivable. There was room now. "No," she said. "It's not nothing." He put his hand briefly on her arm. Brief, just the fact of it, a simple piece of contact in the cold air. Her hand came up and covered his for a moment before he let it go. They stood there for another minute. Then she pulled her coat closed and said, "Liam's going to want to know how it went." "Marcus is probably letting him disassemble something he shouldn't be disassembling," Ethan said. "As long as it's not the motorcycle," she said. "The motorcycle's done," he said. "You can't disassemble a finished thing." She looked at him. The corner of her mouth did the thing that preceded the almost laugh, and then she turned and walked down the courthouse steps, and he walked beside her, and the city was cold and ongoing and full of the ordinary machinery of people getting through their days, and none of it was resolved, and none of it was over. And they walked back to where they'd parked the truck in the specific companionable quiet of two people who have been through enough together that silence between them is no longer empty. It holds things now. It has weight. That's different from being alone in it. Marcus was, in fact, letting Liam do something he shouldn't have been doing. When Ethan and Victoria walked back into Walker's auto at 2:40 in the afternoon, they found Liam on a rolling stool that had been positioned under the Honda Pilot on the left lift. Not dangerously. The lift was locked and Marcus was right there, with a flashlight in one hand and what appeared to be a socket wrench in the other, narrating what he was looking at to Marcus in the specific serious voice he used when he was absolutely convinced he knew what he was talking about. "This part here," Liam was saying, pointing the flashlight at the undercarriage, "I think this is the alternator." "That's the exhaust pipe," Marcus said. A pause. "I knew that," Liam said. Victoria made a sound behind Ethan. He glanced back and she had both hands over her mouth, and her eyes were doing something that was laughing and not laughing at the same time. The two things running together the way they do when you've been holding yourself tightly for a long time, and something small and ordinary finally gets through the grip. Liam heard them and rolled out from under the car and looked at his mother's face with the rapid, practiced assessment of a child who has spent 2 years reading adult expressions for information about his safety. He found something in her face he hadn't seen in a long time. "We're okay," he said. "We're okay," she said. He slid off the stool and crossed the shop, and she caught him and held him, crouching down to his level, her chin on top of his head, her eyes closed. He put his arms around her neck and didn't say anything else. He'd learned, somewhere in the last 2 months, that sometimes the right response to good news was just to be in it for a minute. Marcus looked at Ethan. Ethan gave him a short nod that meant it went the way it needed to go. Marcus let out a long, quiet breath and went back to the Honda. Liam pulled back eventually and looked at his mother. "Can we get food?" he said. "Marcus wouldn't take me to Oswaldo's." "I wasn't supposed to leave," Marcus said, with the tone of someone stating the record. "Oswaldo's," Victoria said. "Absolutely. Give me 5 minutes." She stood up and looked at Ethan over Liam's head. The something that had been on the courthouse steps was still there, quieter now, settled into the afternoon like weather that had moved in and decided to stay. "Thank you," she said. He knew she didn't just mean today. He nodded. 5 minutes, he said. "I'm buying." "You're not buying," she said. "We can discuss it at Oswaldo's," he said. She looked like she was going to argue and then didn't, which he was starting to recognize as its own kind of progress. Shit. The weeks after the hearing moved differently than the weeks before. The pressure didn't disappear all at once. It doesn't work that way. Anyone who's survived something long and sustained knows that the absence of the threat takes time to feel real, that your body keeps waiting for the next thing even when the next thing isn't coming. Victoria still checked her phone constantly, still positioned herself facing the door in every room she entered, still had nights where she woke at 3 a.m. with her heart running fast and the specific weight of old fear sitting on her chest before the logical part of her brain caught up and reminded her where she was. But those nights got further apart. The DA process moved with the efficiency Sandra had predicted. The referral from Judge Carroll carried weight, and the pattern Sandra had assembled over 14 months, documented incidents, medical records, witness statements, the financial irregularities Hayes had embedded in Victoria's company structure, was the kind of case that, once a prosecutor actually sat down with it, became very hard to minimize. Hayes was formally charged in January with 2 counts of fraud and 1 count of domestic violence, the latter requiring Victoria to give a formal statement that she'd prepared for over 3 days and delivered in a room with Sandra at her side. speaking in the same flat, precise, chronological voice she'd used in the courtroom. She cried once, briefly, at a specific detail, and then stopped and kept going. She told Ethan about it the night after, sitting on the stool in the shop after Liam was asleep. She didn't tell him the specific detail that made her cry. He didn't ask. He sat at the bench and listened to what she told him, and when she was done, he said, "How do you feel?" "Scraped out," she said. "Like all the content is gone and the container is still standing." "That's probably normal," he said. "Probably," she said. "It doesn't feel good?" "Not everything that's right feels good," he said. She looked at him. "No," she said, "it doesn't." Hayes's lawyers attempted 2 different procedural challenges to the charges in February. Both were denied. His public image, which he'd spent 2 decades carefully constructing, began to develop visible cracks. A business publication ran a long investigative piece in late January that Sandra had not orchestrated but had not discouraged, and the board of 2 companies Hayes sat on quietly asked him to step back pending the resolution of the charges. He was not yet convicted. The process had its own timeline and its own uncertainties, but the room he'd always controlled was changing around him, and the people in it were starting to make different calculations. Victoria followed all of it with the specific attention of someone who has spent years being managed by a situation and is now, for the first time, watching it from the other side. She wasn't gloating. That wasn't her nature, and also she was too practically focused for it. She tracked it because it was relevant, because the arc of it affected Liam's safety, her company's stability, the structure of the life she was rebuilding piece by piece. The asset freeze was lifted in late January. The full release took another 2 weeks, during which time her finance director, who had been running the company in her absence under the contingency protocol she'd set up 3 years ago, with a foresight she was only now allowing herself to feel grateful for, walked her through the state of things on a video call that lasted 4 hours. The company was fine, steadier than she'd expected, actually. Her finance director, a woman named Kea, who had been with her for 6 years and who Victoria had told only that she needed to disappear for a while and to please handle everything, had handled everything. The board had held. 3 of the larger contracts had been renegotiated in her absence, 2 in ways she'd have done differently, and 1 in a way that was frankly better than what she'd been planning. "You hired well," Ethan said when she told him this. "I did," she said. "I didn't know how well until now." "That's usually when you find out," he said. She had money again. Real money, accessible, not the emergency envelope, not the cash Deb had quietly been supplementing her diner wages with. She could pay rent somewhere. She could put Liam in a real school. She could, theoretically, return to the penthouse she'd left in the middle of October with a bag and a child, and the specific knowledge that if she stopped moving, something bad would happen. She didn't go back to the penthouse. She thought about it. She wasn't sentimental enough to pretend the decision was simple. It was a good property in a good location and represented a significant asset. But it was also a place where she'd spent the last year of her relationship with Victor Hayes, steadily shrinking herself into the corners of rooms, and the walls had absorbed something she didn't want to live inside anymore. She put it on the market in February and didn't feel the loss the way she'd expected to. What she felt instead was a question she hadn't let herself ask before. What does the life I actually want look like? It was a bigger question than it seemed. She'd spent so long building things. The company, the image, the carefully maintained structure of a life that looked excellent from the outside, that she'd lost track of the difference between what she was building toward and what she actually wanted to walk into at the end of the day. She started answering it slowly, the way you answer questions that have been waiting a long time, not with grand decisions, with small ones. She wanted Liam in a school where he could stay. She wanted a kitchen she could use. She wanted to be in Crestfield, which surprised her until she thought about it long enough to understand it. The neighborhood was rough and unglamorous and had cracked sidewalks and a bodega that became her son's favorite place on earth, and she had built the first real sense of safety she'd felt in years inside a mechanic's workshop on Delmar Street, and Crestfield was where that had happened. You don't leave the place where you learn to breathe again just because you can afford somewhere nicer. She found an apartment 6 blocks from the shop in March. 3 bedrooms, 2nd floor, a small balcony that faced east, a kitchen with enough counter space, a lock on the front door that she changed herself the first day. Liam picked his room in approximately 40 seconds by the method of standing in each doorway and making a decision with his body rather than his brain. She enrolled him in the elementary school on Cresswell Street, which was 7 blocks from the shop and 4 blocks from Marlowe's, and required approximately 1 morning of paperwork now that she had full documentation and nothing to hide. Mrs. Felton, when she heard, brought a pie to the apartment and sat in the kitchen with Victoria for an hour and said, without any particular fanfare, that Liam was one of the most genuinely curious children she'd encountered in 40 years of teaching, and that whoever had built his foundation of thinking had done excellent work. Victoria called Ethan that evening to tell him. She said he's genuinely curious, she said. I know, he said. You knew? She told me in November, he said. I didn't want to. I thought you should hear it from her. A pause on the line. Why? Because it's a thing a mother should hear, he said. Not secondhand. She was quiet for a moment. Ethan. Yeah. Come over for dinner on Friday, she said. Bring Danny. It became a Friday thing. Not every Friday. Sometimes the shop ran late. Sometimes Victoria had calls with Sandra or her board that stretched into the evening. Sometimes Danny had a thing at school. But most Fridays, by 6:30 or 7, Ethan and Danny were at the apartment on Fielding Street, and there was food on the table and the 4 of them ate together in the specific comfortable noise of people who've stopped being careful with each other. Danny and Liam had developed a relationship that baffled Ethan slightly in its depth. The 2-year age gap between them should have mattered more than it did. But Danny's particular gravity and Liam's particular enthusiasm had found a complementary frequency, and they were rarely in the same space without being in the middle of something that required both of them. A structure built from whatever materials were available. A system for rating things on a scale that only made sense to them. An ongoing disagreement about whether the left panel on the Indian motorcycle was actually off or whether Liam was just wrong, which had become a recurring debate that Ethan had decided not to intervene in on the grounds that they were both technically correct. Ethan watched Danny in those Friday evenings with the particular attention of a father who has spent 3 years worrying about his son in the low, constant way that becomes so habitual you stop noticing it until it starts to ease. Danny was doing something at those dinners that he didn't do elsewhere. He was relaxed in a way that was different from merely comfortable. He was in a room where both the adults were present, where nobody was performing anything, where the conversation at the table was real and sometimes funny, and occasionally about something hard and always, in some unspoken way, safe. He mentioned Rachel once at dinner in February, not because anyone asked, because something Victoria said reminded him of a thing his mother had done, and he just said it. The way you say things when you're in a place where the memory doesn't have to be managed before it's allowed out. Victoria listened and then asked a question, a real one, not a gracious one, a question that meant she actually wanted to know, and Danny answered it, and the dinner moved on, and afterward Ethan sat in the truck outside the apartment for 5 minutes before he drove home. He wasn't sad. That was the thing he sat with. He was expecting something that felt like grief, and what he found instead was something quieter, something that was more like completion than loss, like a sentence that had been open a long time and had finally, imperfectly, found its period. Rachel was not replaced by this. Nothing replaced her. But the ritual of the Friday booth, the 2 coffee cups, the untouched plate, that had been a way of keeping the door open, of refusing to let the loss settle into something livable. He understood now that it had been necessary for a while, and that it had become a way of being stuck, and that being stuck had been easier for a long time than the alternative being this, imperfect and complicated and full of other people's problems, and also, unmistakably, alive. He still went to Marlowe's on Fridays sometimes. He sat in the same booth. He ordered 1 meal now, which Deb brought without comment, and he ate it and sometimes thought about Rachel and sometimes didn't, and both were okay. The absence was still there, so it was always going to be there. That was the deal. That was the permanent math of loving someone and losing them. But absence is not the same as emptiness. He'd confused those 2 things for 3 years, and he didn't anymore. The conversation that changed things happened on a Thursday night in March. Liam was asleep. Danny was at Ethan's mother's for the week. Victoria and Ethan were in the kitchen after dinner, the specific, quiet domestic aftermath of a meal, dishes done, the apartment settled into its nighttime sounds. She was at the counter with tea, and he was leaning against the opposite counter with coffee, and they were talking about something. The shop. A new contract she'd been looking at, something Liam had said that week. And then they weren't talking about that anymore. She had put her mug down and was looking at him with the working look. Not the assessment version, the other version, the one he'd been seeing more of lately. The one that was less about calculating and more about something she hadn't named yet. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Okay," he said. "And I need you to answer it honestly, not the way you answer things when you're trying not to make something harder than it has to be." "That's a specific request," he said. "I know you," she said. "You sand things down. You simplify. Usually it's good. Right now I need the unsanded version." He set his coffee down. "Ask," he said. "What are we doing?" she said. He held her gaze. "I don't know exactly," he said. "That's the sanded version," she said. "No," he said. "That's the honest one. I don't have it fully articulated, but I know that I come here most Fridays and I don't want to leave. I know that I'm a better version of myself around you than I am when I'm not. I know that the house on Carver Street feels different now than it did in October. And I think that's because of the difference between being alone because there's no one there and being alone because the person you want to be with is somewhere else." He paused. "That's the unsanded version." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not good at this," she said. "Neither am I," he said. "I had one serious relationship in my adult life and it turned into a legal proceeding," she said. "My reference point for what this is supposed to feel like is very specific and very wrong." "Mine's the opposite problem," he said. "My reference point was good and I spent 3 years measuring everything against it and finding it lacking." He paused. "I don't do that with you. I've noticed that." "What do you do with me?" she said. "I just—" He stopped. Found the word. "I just am. With you. I don't measure anything." She looked at him, and something in her face opened in the way it had on the courthouse steps, that rare quality of being completely present in her own expression. "I'm scared," she said. "I want you to know that. Not of you. Of the whole—" She gestured vaguely at the space between them. "The shape of it, what it requires." "What does it require?" he said. "Trusting that it's real," she said. "Trusting that what I think it is actually what it is. I've been wrong about that before in ways that cost me years." "You weren't wrong about your judgment," he said. "You were wrong about him. Those aren't the same thing." She considered this. "My lawyer says the same thing," she said, "in slightly different words." "Sandra's a smart woman," he said. "She is." She picked up her mug. "I don't want to do this wrong," she said. Liam is not a reason to wait," Ethan said. "He's a reason to be honest. There's a difference." She looked at him. "He already looks at you," she said quietly. "You know that. He already—" "I know," he said. "I look at him too." He paused. "Danny does too, for what it's worth." She smiled. "The real one. Not the almost version, the one that changed the room." "Danny is remarkable," she said. "He gets it from his mother," Ethan said. "And before you say anything kind about Rachel, she would have liked you. She had no patience for people who perform things, and you don't perform anything." "I perform things constantly," she said. "In meetings, on calls, with the board. Not here," he said. She was quiet. She looked at him with the expression she'd had the first night in the shop, looking at the motorcycle, genuinely trying to understand something, without pretense. "Okay," she said. "Okay, what?" he said. "Okay, I want to try," she said, slowly, without a plan, which is the hardest possible way for me to do anything, so I want you to know I'm aware of the sacrifice I'm making. He felt something shift in his chest. Not dramatically, not the movie version of the moment, but real and specific and entirely his own. "I can work with slowly," he said. "I know you can," she said. "That's part of why I said it." They stood in the kitchen for another few minutes, finishing their drinks, the conversation drifting back into ordinary things. the contract she was reviewing, a noise the apartment radiator had been making that she was fairly sure was not normal. He told her it was probably fine. She told him he was dismissing it because plumbing wasn't his area of expertise, and he conceded this was possibly true. He left at 10. She walked him to the door. He stopped in the doorway, and she was right there, and he put his hand briefly against the side of her face, the same way he'd put his hand on her arm on the courthouse steps. Brief, uncomplicated, the simple fact of it. She leaned into it slightly, just for a second. "Friday," she said. "Friday," he said. He went down the stairs and out into the March night and drove home to Carver Street, and the house was quiet, and for the first time in a very long time, the quiet was not the first thing he noticed when he walked in. April moved through Crestfield the way April moves through neighborhoods that have seen better days and worse ones, indifferently, blooming anyway, the trees on Delmar Street doing what trees do regardless of what happens beneath them. The criminal case against Victor Hayes moved into the pretrial phase. His lawyers were still working, still filing, still doing the things lawyers do when their client has resources and no moral objection to delay. But the charges were standing. The DA was not backing down, and Hayes, for the first time in Ethan's observation, appeared to be in a room he couldn't make expand around him. Victoria followed it all with the careful attention she'd always given it, but with a different energy now, less braced, less like someone waiting for the floor to drop. She had Sandra. She had documentation. She had 2 character witnesses who had stood in a courtroom and said true things about her with no incentive other than that the true things needed to be said. She was building the company back in the specific way it needed to be built, carefully, with attention to the places where Hayes had embedded influence, removing those pieces one by one the way you remove bad wiring from an otherwise sound structure. Her board was with her. Kea had stayed. 3 of the people she'd been most worried about losing during her absence had not only stayed but had apparently closed ranks in her absence in ways that still surprised her. "People surprise you," she told Ethan one evening. "Sometimes," he said. "I wasn't very good at letting them," she said. "Before." "You're getting better at it," he said. "I'm working on it," she said, which was more honest and therefore better. Liam had settled into Cresswell Elementary the way 6-year-olds settle into things that suit them, completely, without transition. He had friends by the second week, a teacher he liked, an opinion about the lunch menu that he had communicated to Victoria in detailed written form, which she had submitted to the school office with a straight face. Mrs. Felton came to have tea with him once a month, which Liam considered a special occasion and prepared for with a solemnity that made both Victoria and Ethan struggle to maintain neutral expressions. He was becoming himself, which is what children do when they're not spending their energy on vigilance. He was loud sometimes, which he hadn't been in October. He argued about things that didn't matter. He went through a phase of being interested only in marine biology, then a phase of being interested only in engines, then a phase of trying to combine these interests into a single field of study, which he called, without any apparent irony, submarine mechanics. He drew constantly. He read the books Victoria had been reading to him since he was born, and then started reading ahead on his own and reporting back on the parts he thought were good and the parts he thought were wrong. He was, in short, a child. The specific, irreducible fact of him, curious and opinionated and still working out what the world was and how he fit in it, was a thing Victoria looked at sometimes with a feeling she'd had no name for since October and now understood was relief. Not the absence of danger version of relief, the other kind. The kind that comes when something that was almost lost is visibly, undeniably, entirely still there. Danny and Liam were at the shop on a Saturday in late April when Ethan finished recalibrating the left panel on the Indian motorcycle. It had been bothering him since November in the specific low-grade way that small, wrong things bother people who care about precision, and he'd finally taken it apart and reworked the mounting and put it back together, and now it was right. Not just closer, actually right. He stood back and looked at it. Danny looked at it, then at Liam. "You were right," he said, with the difficulty of an 8-year-old acknowledging that a 6-year-old had a valid point. "I know," Liam said. "Don't make a thing of it," Danny said. "I'm not making a thing," Liam said. "I'm just saying I was right." That's making a thing. It's stating a fact. Ethan looked at the motorcycle and felt something uncomplicated and good, which was rare enough that he noticed it. So, the Friday in May that mattered happened without anyone planning it that way. Victoria had suggested the diner, not the apartment, the diner, because Liam had been asking about Marlowe's with a persistence that Deb would have found flattering if she'd known, and because it was warm enough now to walk the 6 blocks without feeling it, and because sometimes the right place for a thing is the place where it started. They walked. The 4 of them, Ethan and Victoria on the outside, Danny and Liam between them, doing some kind of ongoing game that involved pointing at things and assigning them scores according to a system that was never fully explained. The evening was the specific quality that May evenings have sometimes, when the air is still warm from the day and the light is going gold and the city looks briefly like a version of itself that it doesn't usually show. Deb saw them through the window before they got to the door. Ethan saw her see them. The pause in whatever she was doing, the specific expression of someone watching something they've been watching develop and are now seeing arrive somewhere. She had the booth ready, the corner one facing the door. She'd put 4 place settings out. They sat down. Liam immediately began an investigation of the jukebox, which still didn't work, which Liam was clearly going to fix based on the focused manner in which he was examining it. Danny went to supervise. Their voices were small in the background, Liam explaining his diagnosis, Danny contributing a competing theory. Victoria looked at the table. 4 place settings where there used to be 2, then 1 and an absence, then 1 and a held open space. "You okay?" Ethan asked. "Yeah," she said. She looked at the 2 boys at the jukebox. "I keep waiting to feel like this is too much, like it's borrowed or temporary or—" "Does it feel that way?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "That's what I'm trying to tell you. It doesn't." He looked at her. She looked at him. "Good," he said. Deb arrived with coffee and the particular expression of someone who has been patient for a long time and is not going to ruin the moment by saying anything about it. She set the coffee down, looked between them, and said, "The pot roast is good tonight," to Ethan. "Bring 2, he said. Deb looked at him, not at the seat across from him, at him. "2, she said. "Victoria and I will split it," he said, and he meant the food, and he also meant more than the food, and Deb, who had known him long enough to understand both, simply wrote it down and moved away without any further comment because she was excellent at knowing when the moment was not hers. The boys came back. Liam had a theory about the jukebox that involved the internal motor, and Danny had a counter-theory involving the electrical connection, and they were still actively disagreeing when they sat down, which meant dinner began in noise and stayed there, which was the right way for it to go. They ate. The pot roast was good. Liam got gravy on his sleeve and didn't notice until Victoria pointed it out and then shrugged in the way of a child who has decided this is not information that changes anything about his evening. Danny ate with the focused efficiency he'd inherited from somewhere, and then started listening to the jukebox argument again, with the patient expression of someone running a long-term arbitration. Ethan ate and looked at the table and let himself be in the room. That was the thing he had learned. The thing that had taken 3 years and 1 rainy October evening, and everything that followed to understand. Being in the room, not the next room, not the room where you keep the things that are gone, not the room 6 contingency plans ahead, just the one you're actually in, with the specific imperfect people who are actually in it with you. Rachel had taught him to love being in a room. The years after her had taught him that you could be in a room and still be somewhere else entirely. And the woman across the table from him, impractical in her grief, brilliant in her precision, terrible at accepting help until she had to be, still sleeping with one ear toward the door, even in an apartment with changed locks, had taught him that the room you build together out of necessity and stubbornness and small acts of ordinary trust is sometimes more real than the rooms you planned. He wasn't going to stand up and say any of that. It wasn't his nature, and it didn't need to be said to be true. But he thought it, clearly, in the good light of Marlowe's diner, surrounded by the noise of 2 children and the smell of burnt coffee and the sound of Deb in the background moving through her work with the rhythm of someone who has been here 22 years and will be here 22 more. Victoria, without looking up from her plate, reached across the table and moved the extra coffee cup, the one that had appeared by habit, fourth place setting, Deb's muscle memory, to the edge of the table. Not away, just to the side. Making room in the middle of the table for the plate, Liam was already trying to reach across, and the breadbasket Danny had pulled toward himself, and the ordinary territorial negotiation of shared food between two boys who had decided, without any ceremony, that they were going to be in each other's lives. She looked at Ethan. He'd watched her move the cup. "Okay?" she said. He looked at the table, at the space where the cup had been, at what had taken its place. "Yeah," he said. "More than." She held his gaze for a moment. There was no announcement in it, no declaration, just two people looking at each other across a diner table in Crestfield on a Friday evening in May, with all the weight of everything that had brought them here and none of the need to name it. Then Liam said, "Danny won't let me have the bread." And Danny said, "I'm not preventing anything, I'm just holding it." And the moment broke open into the ordinary noise of supper, and everything was exactly, specifically, imperfectly fine. Outside, Crestfield ran its Friday engine, the laundromat across the street, the bus on the corner, the trees on Delmar doing what trees do in May, indifferent and full of it. And in the corner booth of Marlowe's diner, the one facing the door, where Ethan Walker had sat for 3 years with an empty seat across from him, there were no empty seats. Not tonight. Not anymore.